Chapter 2230. As a new product launched today, the spicy chicken was priced at 800 copper coins per serving, and it was still popular among the customers. The customers who had been holding back for a month had their spending power and appetite released at the same time, and there was an obvious increase in the number of orders per person. Amy, who was full, sat on the high stool behind the counter, eating an ice cream in her hand and staring at a cartoon on the tablet. Little Boss is so cute. Mr. Mac is so lucky. I wonder which woman will benefit from it in the future. Of course it's me. The wine hasn't been served yet, and you're already drunk. A few young ladies sitting at the counter teased softly. Amy looked away from the tablet and landed on the ladies. She said seriously, "Father likes ladies who eat a lot." Then she turned back to continue watching the cartoon. The four ladies were stunned. They looked at each other, and their minds suddenly became lively. Didn't we order a little too little? Should we add more? Yes. I felt a little hungry before I came, and I've been eating a lot recently. Then let's order a few more dishes. How about a red braised pork? Meow. Ugly Duckling lay on its back with its belly as a flat cushion. It looked at those stupid women with its head hanging and rolled its eyes. Don't move, Amy whispered as her little meaty paw hit its face. Ugly Duckling immediately tilted its head and pretended to be dead, not daring to move. This is Mr. Meg's daughter? Ho Catalan looked at Amy and said in surprise, "She can draw picture books at such a young age." This is Mr. Mac's daughter, Little Boss Amy. She seems to be 4 years old this year, but she didn't draw the picture books, Milo said with a smile. I knew it. Ho Catalan smiled and almost got a shock. He thought the threshold for geniuses and prodigies had been raised so high. Little Amy is the disciple of Crassus and Julian. I heard that she won the championship at the Magic Caster tournament some time ago and defeated an 8th-tier Magic Caster, Milo continued. Cough, cough. Cough, cough. Ho Catalan's eyes widened. He almost coughed to death, but he still looked at Milo in shock. You mean she's an 8th-tier Magic Caster? A 4-year-old 8th-tier Magic Caster? Garland nodded and said seriously, "At present, we only know that she defeated an 8th-tier Magic Caster, but we're not sure if she's an 8th-tier Magic Caster." Ho Catalan suddenly felt that his brain wasn't working properly. A 4-year-old girl had defeated an 8th-level magician and won the championship. This was a story that even a picture book wouldn't dare to draw casually. Ho Catalan's Milo, as well as Milo. Milo thought for a while and said, "I don't think the three of us together can beat that fat cat." What kind of beast is that? How Keto was shocked. That's the mysterious existence called Ugly Duckling by Little Boss. I think under its orange fat cat appearance, there might be some mysterious magical beast's true form hidden. Milo nodded solemnly. He looked at Ugly Duckling, who was lying on the counter with its belly supporting a black metal plate, and said, "No matter what kind of powerhouse it is, it treats them with such an expression. You can imagine how powerful it is." Ho Catalan and Garland stared at Ugly Duckling's round face for a while. Ugly Duckling seemed to have sensed something. It showed them a pair of dead fish eyes and put on an expression that said, "You mortals dare to peek at me? I knew it." The two quickly retracted their gazes and agreed with Milo's words. "Let's have a spicy chicken too." Milo flipped open the menu. "Is there no chicken in this spicy chicken?" Ho Catalan looked at the picture. His eyes were full of chili. It was a bright red plate, but he couldn't see where the chicken was. This. Garland and Milo were also stunned. This really looked a little mysterious. Maybe Mr. Mac wants to tell everyone that this dish is very spicy, and the chicken is hidden in the pile of chili, Milo analyzed. Could it be that Mr. Mac hid the chicken inside the chili, chewing it together with the chili? Garland guessed. This is dried chili, not green chili. How can it be? Ho Catalan rolled his eyes, pointed, and said, "Let's order it and see." Makes sense. Anyway, it's Boss treat today. Milo nodded. Ho Catalan waved his hand and said generously, "It's my treat today." Garland's eyes lit up, and she said with a smile, "Then let's have a look at Buddha Jumps Over the Wall." Ho Catalan glanced at the price of 10,000 copper coins per unit. His eyelids twitched, and he reached out to press down on the menu. "Is this Buddha Jumps Over the Wall as fragrant as the succubus from the massage parlor? Garland and Milo smiled knowingly. They turned the page and ordered grilled fish instead. Of course, the succubus was more fragrant. Catalan straightened his clothes and also smiled. One serving of Buddha jumps over the wall was 10,000 copper coins, and 3 servings were 30,000 copper coins. Going to the massage parlor and ordering a succubus for a set of 699 copper coins was not only cheap, but also comfortable. I'm really a smart boss. Catalan ordered the dishes and looked around the restaurant. The original wood-style decoration was simple and elegant. The comfortable partition did not affect the hall's transparency, but also gave the guests a comfortable sense of distance. It could be called a master-level example. After the guests took their seats, the restaurant that could seat hundreds of people was full. They ordered in order and spoke softly and slowly. It was not noisy at all, and it made people feel comfortable. From the moment you stepped into Mamie's, you could feel a relaxed atmosphere, including the feeling that the waiters gave you. They were close, but also a little distant. It was just the right sense of distance, and it made people feel more at ease. I've been to so many restaurants. Mr. Mac is indeed the most impressive rule maker I've ever seen, Catalan said in admiration. He had read about the rules and order of Mamie restaurant on several occasions in the past, but he was still skeptical that a restaurant with so many different races would be able to enjoy a comfortable meal. Now that he was witnessing it in person, he was truly quite stunned. Some of Mr. Mac's ideas are indeed very advanced, but it does give the guests a better dining experience. Garland nodded with a smile. If you were in Rendezvous, you definitely wouldn't imagine that eating with demons, orcs, and giant dragons could be so harmonious and elegant. Actually, all of you don't realize one thing. Because this is Chaos City, and more importantly, Mr. Mac's dishes are irreplaceable, so he has a higher voice in the hearts of the customers, Milo said. For a foodie, it was a disaster to put you on Mamie's blacklist. After ordering, the dishes were delivered to the guests' tables one after another. Your spicy chicken. Mia came over with a tray and placed a spicy chicken on the table. Chapter 22:31. Catalan and the others were in the midst of their grilled fish when they turned their attention to the spicy chicken. They were greeted by the sight of a sea of bright red chili peppers, and their bodies began to heat up just from looking at it. However, the real thing really matched the picture perfectly. There wasn't a single piece of chicken in sight. It was completely covered in chili peppers. It can't really be a dish of stir-fried chili, right? Catalan picked up his chopsticks and brushed aside the chili peppers. It was as if he were sweeping away a layer of fallen leaves, revealing the browned chicken beneath. The small pieces of chicken were fried to a beautiful golden color, and they were hidden among the countless chili peppers. After the chili peppers were brushed aside from the spiciness, the crispy aroma of the chicken also wafted through the air, making all 3 of their eyes light up. Looks quite interesting. Let me try it first. Catalan eagerly picked up a piece of chicken and put it into his mouth. After biting into it, the outside of the chicken was crispy and fragrant, but after biting into it, the inside was extraordinarily tender and juicy. With this bite, a spicy and fragrant taste filled his mouth. It was numb but not numb, spicy but not dry. It was quite chewy, and the more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. He felt that he couldn't stop and couldn't help but pick up another piece. This chicken had probably been fried twice. The first time, it was cooked at a low temperature, and the second time, it was refried at a high temperature. That was why the chicken was so crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. Catalan had only tasted this method in a few fried chicken restaurants in Rendezvous, and most chefs viewed it as a secret. The control of the oil temperature was also of the utmost importance. The condition of Meg's spicy chicken was far superior to that of the fried chicken restaurants he had tasted in the past. Every piece of meat was in perfect condition, and he couldn't help but want to slap the table in praise as he enjoyed the deliciousness of the dish. One had to realize that those fried chicken restaurants have been passed down for several generations, and their recipes have been improved over and over again, but they still couldn't compare to Meg's new dish. Mr. Mac's culinary skills were clearly exemplary. Furthermore, not only did the chicken have a layer of flavor on the outside, it was also rich in flavor on the inside. It was clear that the chicken had been marinated in advance before it was cooked. Details often determined whether a dish could be called a delicacy or not, and this spicy chicken was impeccable in terms of creativity and details. After eating a few pieces of chicken, Hokkaido put down his chopsticks and panted. After a while, he realized that his forehead and nose were covered in sweat. How carefree! This spicy chicken is too fragrant. Hokkaido praised. He could now be sure that Milo was not lying. His words could only express 1/10 of Mr. Mac's food. Only those who had really tasted the food could experience the deliciousness. Any description of the food would seem a little weak. For example, he couldn't think of many words to describe this spicy chicken. Perhaps he needed to wait until he went back and sat alone at night to seriously reflect on it. Only then would he know how to write this manuscript. Of course, the most important thing now was to finish off the table of delicacies in front of him. Otherwise, he would feel too ashamed to face himself. Milo and Garland lowered their heads and ate their chicken in silence. What kind of food speech was this? He couldn't stop at all. On the other side, Vivian eagerly picked up a piece of chicken and placed it into her mouth. As she chewed, her eyes lit up, and after swallowing, she exclaimed, "Oh, this is so delicious." The chicken is crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. It's a little similar to beggar's chicken, but it's more delicate. In one bite, you can experience two completely different textures, but they have the same amazing taste. It's spicy and refreshing. It's amazing. Vivian picked up another piece of chicken and put it into her mouth. As she chewed, her eyes were filled with tears of happiness. That familiar warm feeling appeared again. In her body, a warm current slowly flowed, nourishing her already repaired body. Other than the spicy grilled fish, she had a new choice. Is it really that good? Michael picked up a piece of chicken skeptically. He could smell the spiciness, but it didn't seem very strong. At least, it wasn't as crazy as the spicy grilled fish. Michael let out a light breath and put the chicken into his mouth. He bit into the chicken. It was indeed crispy, but the crispy exterior wrapped around the tender interior. After biting into it, the juicy meat began to explode in his mouth. Numb, spicy, fresh, fragrant. Michael's face was slightly red. His mouth was open, and he raised a hand to fan himself slowly. At the same time, he had to maintain the dignity of a city lord on his face. His eyes were also glistening with tears. "Father, isn't it super delicious? It's so delicious that I'm about to cry." Vivian looked at Michael, and then picked up another piece of chicken and put it into Michael's slightly open mouth. Michael. It's so delicious. Michael's tears flowed slowly as he nodded and praised with a red face. Luna looked at this scene of a benevolent father and a filial daughter with a smile on her face. However, she suddenly felt a little homesick. Eunice picked up a piece of chicken with the serving chopsticks and put it into Luna's bowl with a smile, and said, "Luna, you should try it too." "Thank you." Luna took a bite of the chicken. Seeing that it was full of red chili, she already had some expectations of how spicy it would be. It was still within an acceptable range. The chicken was neither big nor small, and it was just the right size to chew. It was spicy and crispy, and it was a little intoxicating when chewed. She subconsciously raised her head to look in the direction of the kitchen. Through the crowd, she could only see a busy silhouette. A smile appeared on her face unconsciously. Mr. Meg was still a creative person. He could always surprise people with delicacies. Mr. Mac is really amazing. He can always come up with something new for me. Vivian ate a few pieces of chicken and was still full of praise. "I think you'll be the happiest if you marry Mr. Mac," Eunice said with a smile. "Mom, you have such connections?" Vivian turned her head and looked at Eunice with a serious expression. "You really dare to think about it." Eunice laughed in exasperation. "I object to this marriage." Michael, who had finally suppressed the spiciness with beer, raised his hand and said sternly, "Father, just eat your food." Vivian picked up another piece of chicken and put it into Michael's mouth. "Michael, I don't really want to, but our teacher Luna." Vivian's gaze turned, and she looked at Luna with a smile. She whispered, "Mom, little Amy is Luna's student, and she likes Luna a lot. Why don't you help set them up?" "Vivian." Luna reached out and pinched Vivian's waist. Her face quickly turned red, and she looked at Eunice and whispered, "Auntie, she's just talking nonsense." "There's no such thing," Eunice smiled and said. "It's okay. Annie has been through this before. I understand. Mr. Mack is indeed a good person. Annie will help you ask him later." Michael frowned. He wanted to tactfully remind them that this marriage was not very appropriate. Irina was not someone to be trifled with, and Meg most likely did not have the guts to do so. However, when he saw Vivian reaching out for a pair of chopsticks, he tactfully shut his mouth. Sigh. Mr. Mack's charm had nowhere to go. Chapter 2232. "Mr. Mack, this is my boss. He specially came to Chaos City today to talk to you." After the lunch service, when Meg was about to close the door, Garland brought an extremely tall, middle-aged man over. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Meg. I am Ho-Catalan." Ho-Catalan extended his hand with a smile. "Nice to meet you." Meg shook his hand before retracting it and saying, "If Boss Ho-Catalan wants to talk about the exclusive column, then there's no need for that. I have already signed a contract with a few other magazine publishers, and this matter has already been settled. Although it's a little regretful, I still respect Mr. Meg's choice very much." Ho-Catalan nodded and continued, "However, I am not here for this matter today. I want to talk to Mr. Meg about the color printing." "Color printing?" Meg frowned slightly. He didn't expect that the second person to come to talk to him about this apart from a hill was Ho-Catalan, who came all the way from Rodu. "Your daughter is a genius in painting. She will definitely become a famous painter in the future." Ho-Catalan took out the picture book that he had bought earlier and smilingly said, "And you, who solved the color printing problem, will become a person who will be recorded in history." "Oh, you're talking about this." Meg smiled and said, "Then you might have misunderstood. I commissioned the Night Elves printing factory to help me print this picture book. To be able to reproduce it so perfectly, the workmanship is indeed amazing." "Huh?" Ho-Catalan and Garland were both stunned. They looked at each other and stared at each other. Could it be that the color printing method was not invented by Mr. Meg? Instead, it came from a Night Elves? This was completely out of their expectations. If the commissioning party was the Night Elves, then it would be a little troublesome. The Night Elves were rather famous on the Norland continent recently. Irina had rebelled against the Wind Forest, created the Night Elves, and brought tens of thousands of elves to Chaos City. However, they didn't expect the Night Elves to build a printing factory after coming to Chaos City. And it even solved the color printing problem. Of course, if Meg's picture book was printed by the Night Elves, it meant that this printing factory would also accept printing work from others. Perhaps he could take this opportunity to reach a cooperation with the Night Elves and seize the initiative. It was just that they had just arrived and had no contact with the Night Elves, so they didn't know how to contact them. Irina was famous, and she had Alex as her backer. The current Night Elves could no longer be underestimated. Ho-Catalan looked up at Meg, and his eyes suddenly lit up. He smiled and said, "Mr. Meg, can I trouble you to introduce us to the Night Elves in charge of color printing? We, Whole Foods and Meats, want to upgrade our products. This is a small token of our appreciation. Please accept it." Meg looked at the banknote in Ho-Catalan's hand and smiled as he waved his hand and said, "There's no need for the money. I just want to introduce you to someone. I'll take you there, but whether or not this matter will work out will depend on you." All right. Thank you for your trouble." Ho-Catalan nodded happily. Meg boarded their horse-drawn carriage and went straight to the textile factory in the north of the city. He wanted to reject Ho-Catalan directly, but on second thought, he threw this hot potato to the Night Elves. Color printing was indeed a very important core technology. Even the hill was tempted, and Ho-Catalan had traveled thousands of miles to Chaos City early in the morning. This showed how attractive it was. He was more afraid of trouble. It would be too troublesome if he had to reject all the different people who came to him for cooperation every day. With such huge benefits involved, it was inevitable that some people would have other thoughts, and that would be even more troublesome. The Night Elves were a good scapegoat. Anyway, he planned to help them develop the printing industry and set up the first printing factory on the Norland continent that could accept color printing. And the Night Elves had Irina and Alex's support. With Alex's reputation as the Norland continent savior, no one would dare to have other thoughts. With the core technology in hand and a strong backing, he was definitely a strong client. Speaking of which, he was still borrowing his own reputation, so he didn't feel guilty at all. The Night Elves were all on his side, so it was just a matter of a few words to smooth things over. Mr. Meg, are there any taboos on the Night Elf side? Was it successful when you want to talk to them? Ho-Catalan asked carefully as he sat opposite Meg. Meg looked at Ho-Catalan, who was sweating and could tell that he was a little nervous. He couldn't help but find it funny, but he still calmly said, "It was quite successful when I went to look for them. I made a simple request and signed the contract. I don't know if it was because of my face." Ho-Catalan's face twitched, but he still smiled. Mr. Meg's handsome face is indeed a plus. I think so too. Meg nodded. Ho-Catalan. Although he was a little speechless at Meg's narcissism, Ho-Catalan felt a little more confident in his heart. This meant that the Night Elves printing factory should have sufficient production capacity, and they didn't have any long-term high-quality customers. A customer like Meg, who suddenly wanted to print a picture book for his daughter, was not stable. But Whole Foods had a monthly circulation of hundreds of thousands of copies. As long as they could confirm it, it would be a big business. The horse-drawn carriage stopped at the entrance of the textile factory. Meg alighted and said to Ho-Catalan, "Wait here for a while. I will go and find someone for you." "Thank you, Mr. Meg." Ho-Catalan quickly cupped his fists. Meg waved his hand and strode into the textile factory. The elf at the door even greeted Meg familiarly. "Seems like Mr. Meg is indeed a regular here." Ho-Catalan let down the curtains and felt much more relieved. Meg entered the textile factory and went straight to Irina's office. Irina was listening to Ashley's report on the progress of the weight loss potion. When she heard the report from outside, she looked at Ashley and said, "The effect is sufficient, but whether it will be popular still needs to be tested. Make a batch of finished products first, then find a group of interested customers and let them taste it. After that, make improvements based on the feedback." Okay. Ashley put away the potion bottle on the table, opened the door, and went out. "Hello, Mr. Meg." Ashley greeted Meg, who was standing outside the door. "Hello, Miss Ashley." Meg nodded slightly. His gaze landed on the blue potion bottle in her hand, and he smiled. "This is the weight loss potion you mentioned last time?" "Yes, this is the finished product." Ashley nodded. "Can I take a look?" Meg asked curiously. Ashley directly handed the potion bottle to Meg. Meg pulled the stopper and sniffed. There was a strong smell of grass. It wasn't a strong smell, but it definitely didn't make one have much appetite. Chapter 2233. There were already more than 40,000 Night Elves. During this period of time, the number of Night Elves who joined the Night Elves from the Wind Forest was still increasing. The textile factory was huge, and they didn't have to worry about sales. However, with the high efficiency of a steam textile machine, they could only employ over 10,000 Night Elves. Of course, with the textile factory's current operating condition, they could totally afford the daily expenses of the Night Elves. Of course, it wasn't enough to cover the expenses. As the highest leader, Irina gave the highest order to blossom more and become well off, to promote the development of a Night Elves in many directions. When Meg came the last time, he happened to hear Ashley and Irina discussing this weight loss potion. Although it was called a weight loss potion, it was actually a kind of herbal prescription that had been passed down from the elves' ancestors. It indeed had the effect of lowering body fat, and the side effects were very small. Even little elves would drink a cup every day to maintain the smoothness of their intestines. Irina and the others planned to improve this prescription before turning it into a weight loss potion for sale. Meg admired Irina's foresight very much. Women occupied the absolute throne in terms of consumption. No matter if it was clothes, daily necessities, food, or toys, women had the most powerful spending power. As for becoming beautiful, women were even more willing to spend more money and time. This could be seen from the popularity of the tofu pudding. It was a type of weight loss potion that could make you slim down without exercising. Moreover, it was completely different from those cheap potions on the market that relied on diarrhea to reduce water content. There were almost no side effects. Once it was released, the enthusiasm of women could be imagined. However, Meg frowned when he smelled it. For the sake of becoming beautiful, women could easily accept this little flaw. However, if they wanted to make it into a national health drink that could be sold well and had a wide market instead of just focusing on women's needs to lose weight, this might not be enough. Meg sucked up a few drops of the green liquid with a straw and dripped it into his mouth. The taste of the green grass was rich and slightly bitter. There were also some impurities, and the taste was very bad. I don't know how effective it is for now, but I think it's best for you to make some improvements on the taste and texture. Meg put the cap back on the medicine bottle. He looked at Ashley and said, "The filter screen can be finer, or the impurities can be smaller. At the very least, it won't give people an obvious sense of granularity. The smell shouldn't be very good for ordinary people. You elves may be more receptive to the fragrance of this grass, but for ordinary people, it's a little pungent and bitter. You can add some fruit acids and sweeteners to improve the taste." Ashley took out a small notebook and quickly made notes. After thinking for a while, she asked, "If it's sour fruit, what kind of fruit is suitable? It seems like it's hard to find fresh fruits in Chaos City during this season. Lemons, oranges, apples. You could try many of them. Fresh fruits are actually not hard to find. Chaos City's ice and snow have yet to melt, but the Demon Islands are like spring all year round. With your current conditions, it's not difficult for you to disguise yourself and make a trip to the Demon Islands." Meg smiled and said, "You have to have a global awareness when doing business." Ashley's eyes lit up. She nodded with a smile and said, "Okay, thank you, Mr. Meg, for your guidance." "You're welcome. I happen to have something to discuss with you and Princess Irina. Let's go in and have a talk," Meg said. "All right." Ashley kept her little notebook, took the potion bottle, and followed Meg into the office. Meg told them about the plan to build the Night Elves printing factory. If they could use color printing on a large scale, it should be a very huge industry. This made Irina and Ashley rather happy. "Because I'm worried that people will target us, I intend to announce to the public that this technology is controlled by the Night Elves. There might be many people coming to look for you to cooperate. However, our production capacity is limited at the moment, and we can only produce some high-quality picture books. Therefore, we will reject those collaborations with the reason that we don't have enough production capacity. You can keep the customer's information. When our production capacity expands in the future, we will establish a collaboration with them," Meg said. "All right." Ashley nodded and noted it down. "There's a person outside the door now. He's the boss of Whole Food Mart. He wants to seek a collaboration. You can reply to him according to this." "I brought him over," Meg said with a smile. "You're rejecting the person you brought over too?" Ashley was a little surprised. "He's just pushing the responsibility to us." Irina pursed her lips. She could see through Meg's thoughts at a glance. Ashley was deep in thought, but she didn't feel disgusted. Mr. Meg was the Night Elves' most important partner. Regardless of whether it was helping them to break free from the blockade back then or the series of support after they came to Chaos City, which allowed them to gain a foothold here, it was enough for the Night Elves to treat him as a distinguished guest. Now, he was handing such an important industry to them. This trust and care was just to save them some trouble, so they naturally wouldn't shirk it. Ho-Catalan received an invitation to enter the factory, and the person who received him was the person in charge of the printing factory, Miss Ashley. She was a beautiful and dignified elf. However, when he finished his request for a collaboration, the other party rejected his collaboration with the reason that they didn't have enough production capacity. "Boss, how was it?" Garland asked softly as he looked at Ho-Catalan, who came out after a while. "It didn't work out." Ho-Catalan shook his head. He looked at the quaint factory door and sighed. "They said that they don't have enough production capacity, so they're only taking on some exquisite picture books at the moment. They'll collaborate with us again when their production capacity increases. In that case, all the production capacity is taken up by Mr. Mack." Garland was a little surprised, but he still consoled him. "It's not too bad. At least the other party agreed to collaborate with us after their production capacity increases. We've got a head start. Ho-Catalan nodded. He could only console himself like that. Meg walked out the door. Ho-Catalan quickly lifted the curtain and said, "Mr. Meg, let me send you back." "Thank you." Meg didn't stand on ceremony and squeezed into the warm carriage. It was such a cold day, so he couldn't be bothered to hail a cab back. "How was it? Is it a success?" Meg asked with a smile as he sat down opposite Ho-Catalan. "It's all thanks to Mr. Meg. It's half done. They said that we can collaborate after our production capacity increases," Ho-Catalan said with a smile. "That's good. I heard that their production capacity isn't very high. They can only print 1,000 picture books a day." Meg nodded. "Yes, it's all thanks to Mr. Meg's introduction." Ho-Catalan flattered him again. Meg was able to take on all the production capacity of the color prints alone, and even if he added more money, he couldn't persuade him. It could be seen that the relationship between Meg and the Night Elves was indeed very good. It was worthy of a deep friendship. Ho-Catalan flattered him a lot along the way and also asked about some information about the color prints in a roundabout way. Meg accepted all the flattery, and all the information was vaguely dealt with. Anyway, the blame had already been thrown out, and he had nothing to say if he said that he didn't know anything. "This is a small token of my appreciation. I'll buy candy for the 2 children. Please accept it, Mr. Meg." When they got off the carriage, Ho-Catalan took out the banknote from before and stuffed it into Meg's hand. Meg glanced at him and thought to himself that he would just treat it as an additional fee for the million-selling magazine. He accepted the money with a clear conscience. Chapter 2234. Meg went to the ice cream shop and had a private chat with Gina to inform her of Lantist's current situation. Gina couldn't hide her joy when she heard that Lantist had successfully integrated into the underground city. However, she couldn't hide her disappointment when she knew that she wouldn't be able to meet them again. "Don't worry, Gina. This is only the current situation. When Lantist gains a foothold in the underground city and has more say, you two might be able to meet again." Meg patted her shoulder gently. Gina nodded gently and smiled again. "It's all right. I chose to stay. I'm relieved to hear that they are all well." Meg looked at her smile and couldn't help but feel sorry for her. He said, "I will ask them again later to see if there are other ways to enter the underground city. If it's suitable, I will bring you along." "All right." Although Gina couldn't think of any way that Meg could enter the underground city, she had an inexplicable confidence in him. "Oh yes, boss. I want to make a trip back to Lantist in the next 2 days." Gina took out the crystal ball that Dexter gave her. There was a little blue light shining in the crystal ball. "The sea god's pearl is acting strangely. The high priest once said that this might be related to the sea god's ruins. I want to go back and take a look." Meg knew that she was talking about the trench that Lantist was in previously. He looked at the crystal ball, nodded, and said, "I'll go with you in the next 2 days. I'll be worried if you go alone." "All right." Gina nodded obediently with warmth in her heart. "But what is this legend about the sea god? Is it the god that Lantist believes in?" Meg asked curiously. "Yes. After Lantist sank into the sea, they believed in the sea god. They made sacrifices and established a connection with the sea god, asking the sea god to bless Lantist. In the past few thousand years, the sea god had..." Gina nodded and told him a legend about the sea god's belief. It wasn't much different from the gods that other races believed in. The connection between the sea god and Lantist was still very vague. The sea god's pearl was one of the mediums, and there would be some strange phenomena occasionally. It would be seen as the will of the sea god, and the high priest would analyze it. This made Meg wonder if the sea god really existed. The existence of the underground city had shattered some of his previous assumptions. The so-called gods above level 10 existed in the underground city, but they were called extraordinaires. The ancient ones migrated to the underground world because they couldn't become gods on the Northern continent. If all the races worshipped and worshipped gods, then where were they? Other extraordinaires were so down to earth. Yet your god was always making illusory things to entertain his descendants? This was indeed very strange. Even the various races did not have very accurate records about the gods, including Irina, who grew up in the core of the wind forest. She still had not come into contact with the so-called gods. Therefore, Meg was quite interested in Gina's so-called sea god anomaly. He wanted to see if it was a mythical natural phenomenon or if someone was really faking it. Of course, there was another very important reason why he wanted to go to the endless sea realm. He wanted to eat seafood. Furthermore, the restaurant hadn't had a team event in a long time. Letting the girls bring their beautiful swimsuits and go for a swim at the beach to let loose their moods, was pretty good. In the evening, Yabamiya came to the restaurant early. "Mia, why are you here so early today?" Meg looked at Mia, who seemed to have a lot on her mind, and let her in first. "Boss, Mia entered the door and stopped in her tracks. She looked up at Meg, pursed her lips, and hesitantly said, "I'm a little worried about big sister Elizabeth." "Don't worry. Everyone says she's safe. She might have already returned to Dragon Island," Meg said with a smile. He heard from Irina last night that Rankster had already returned to Frost Dragon Island and sat on the Frost Throne again. Elizabeth had gone back with him. However, they hadn't come to look for Mia yet. They might have other plans, so he couldn't reveal too much. But Mia still looked worried. She took out a delicate purse and said to Meg, "Do you know any way to contact her? Do you need money? I have the salary that I've saved for the past few months here." Meg thought for a while and said, "Then I'll ask someone for you. I have a friend who happens to be in this field. I'll give you news in 2 days." Mia's eyes lit up and she happily said, "Okay, thank you so much, boss. Here's the money. This money is for you." Mia handed the purse in her hand to Meg. "Ask a friend. It's free. Keep this money. It wasn't easy to save it." Meg pushed the money back with a smile. This girl was really treating him as an outsider. Mia looked at Meg, and her hand that was holding the purse stopped in midair for a while. Then she hugged Meg tightly and let go. She took 2 steps back and seriously said, "Boss, I will definitely work hard in the future. It's pretty good now. If you work harder, the others won't have any work to do." Meg patted her head with a smile. He thought that Rankster and Elizabeth should be coming to look for her in 2 days. He didn't know if she was going to return to the Frost Dragon tribe to be a princess or if she would stay. Although he was a little selfish, Meg still respected Mia's choice very much. This girl had suffered too much since she was young. She lost her father completely, and her mother died early. She wandered around as a half-dragon. Rankster owed him too much, so he would probably compensate her. With his power and status, it wasn't difficult for him to give her a lifetime of glory. Moreover, with Elizabeth around, even if she returned to Frost Dragon Island, she wouldn't be lonely. "I wonder if big sister Elizabeth found her father," Mia mumbled softly. She was worried and expectant at the same time. Meg nodded slightly. Maybe. She put in so much effort to look for him. Maybe she found him. It would be great if she found him, Mia said with a smile as a glimmer of hope flashed across her eyes. "How's the ice cream shop recently? Is it still busy?" Meg changed the topic. "It's quite busy. The children haven't started school yet. Many parents would bring their children to the ice cream shop to play. It's a good company." Mia nodded with a smile and said, "But Gina is the busiest. She's the only one who can control the most mischievous and crybaby." Meg also smiled when he heard that. Gina's talent in this area was indeed admirable. "Oh yes, when you were out, there was a missionary uncle who often came to wait outside Amy's. When I asked him, he only said that he was looking for Amy, but didn't say why. Sometimes, he would sit at the door for the whole afternoon. However, he hasn't come this week." "I almost forgot," Mia suddenly said. Chapter 2235. Someone from the church? Meg was a little surprised. Ever since they met the Pope in Rodu, they didn't have any other contact with the church. However, according to Mia, someone from the church even came to Chaos City to look for them. "I haven't seen him the past few days, so it shouldn't be anything urgent," Meg said casually. Amy's invisible wings were given to her by the old Pope. That fellow wanted to trick Amy into becoming the Saintess. He didn't want Amy to leave home to become the Saintess at such a young age, even if she was the Pope. A holy see that was declining day by day was not promising at all. I heard from Angela that the church in the Roth Empire is very powerful. Even the king of the Roth Empire was crowned by the Pope, Mia said curiously. That was just a ceremony. The Pope isn't so powerful now, Meg said with a smile. However, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind, and a strange expression appeared on his face. The church's status in the Roth Empire was indeed very special. During the racial war, the church's status was very high, and the Pope could appoint and dismiss the leaders of the human race through the church's meetings. However, after the racial war ended and the Roth Empire was established, the country's power began to be concentrated in the hands of the king. The church's presence and power were constantly weakened by the successive kings, and now it was like a mascot, only appearing on important occasions. The church, which had once guided humans out of the Dark Age, was now only left with a little power on the surface. However, in terms of procedure, the power of the king still existed, and the Pope did have the right to appoint and dismiss the king in name. Then, this was a little interesting. Should I go and have a chat with that old man when I'm free? Meg was deep in thought. The best way to break Andre's rule was naturally from within. Are you going to prepare for the dinner service? Is there anything I can help you with? Mia asked Meg, who was in a daze. Just sit and play with Ugly Duckling for a while. Leave the kitchen to us. Meg pointed at Ugly Duckling, which was lying on the counter. It's too fat recently. Get to move more. There's a cat stick under the counter. All right. Yabamia made her way over to the counter with a smile and pulled out a slender cat stick from under the counter. There was a furry gray squirrel tied to the stick, and its long tail was wagging with a little bell attached to it. She turned to Ugly Duckling and said, "Come and play, Ugly Duckling." Ugly Duckling looked up at her with a hint of interest in its eyes before turning away and closing its eyes again. "Stupid Draken, do you think I will play with you?" Ding! The bell rang. Ugly Duckling's ears immediately perked up, and its long eyelashes fluttered, but it still resisted the urge to do so. "Get up." Mia gently waved the cat stick in front of it, and the little squirrel's tail rubbed against its nose, making a soft sound. Ugly Duckling opened its eyes immediately and swatted at the little squirrel with its paw. Mia reacted quickly, and with a flick of her wrist, the cat stick bent at an angle, and the little squirrel slipped past Ugly Duckling's paw and into the air. Ugly Duckling quickly adjusted itself from its prone position, exerted strength on its four limbs, and leaped up after the little squirrel. Mia twisted her wrist again, and the cat stick fell rapidly. The little squirrel slipped past Ugly Duckling's fingers and then fell down close to its face. Ugly Duckling's eyes widened instantly. It had already left the counter, and with its four limbs spread out, it fell straight to the ground from midair. Luckily, its paw was thick enough, and it bounced a little when it fell to the ground. Then, it rolled forward twice before coming to a stop. "Ha ha! Ugly Duckling, you're so stupid." Mia laughed like a goose. Ugly Duckling lay on the ground with a dejected expression on its face. "My reputation has been ruined by this woman." Ding, ding, the bell rang again. Although its heart was resisting, its body was too honest, and it chased after the little squirrel. "Don't run. Stop right there. You stupid rat." Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, which was jumping up and down because of Mia's teasing, with a smile on his face. This little thing was definitely not ordinary. It even dared to bare its teeth in front of Ozzy. Furthermore, it had only been a few months, and its weight was already close to 10 kilograms. It was only a matter of time before it collapsed the brick bed. TSK, TSK. Ugly Duckling is actually diligent in losing weight today, Amy exclaimed when she pushed the door open and saw Ugly Duckling running on the walls. Hearing Amy's voice, Ugly Duckling, which was originally focused on chasing the little squirrel, turned around abruptly. It missed a step and fell from the beam. Luckily, Amy reacted quickly and rushed over to give it a kick. She kicked it to the wall and prevented it from falling to the ground. Mia caught Ugly Duckling, who had bounced off the wall, and rubbed its fat face with a smile. "Your skin is getting more and more bouncy." Ugly Duckling. Amy hung the little school bag on the hook behind the counter and looked at Ugly Duckling. If you grow a little rounder, I'll give you to the school's football team. They can save the effort of picking up the ball. Ugly duckling. Sigma. Sigh. If you don't want to be treated as a football, then run 10 laps around the restaurant before eating. Amy took Ugly Duckling from Mia's arms and put on the ground. She reached out to touch its fat paws. Look, you don't even have legs. I still want to ride you out in the future. Do you want to roll around with me? Ugly Duckling raised its short little leg and gestured. Too short equals no leg. Ugly Duckling looked at her leg. Amy raised her leg and kicked it. Swoosh. Ugly Duckling started to run around the restaurant like an orange whirlwind. Its speed was quite astonishing. You ran very well. Add another 20 laps. Amy praised. The whirlwind slipped and hit its head on the wall. After a while, it started running again. Meg looked at this scene with a smile. This was Amy's pet, so he wouldn't interfere in how she trained it. And just as Amy said, as a magical beast, Ugly Duckling was really too lazy and neglected training. If it continued to be fat like this, it wouldn't even be able to go out, let alone fight. One had to know that when beast tamers trained magical beasts, they had to train them like a devil from a young age. All kinds of combat and obedience training were extremely cruel. Ugly Duckling ran around the restaurant dozens of laps. It was simply too gentle. Amy walked to the kitchen door and looked at Meg, who was grinding soy milk, as she said, "Father, I heard from Jessica that she'll be going to Hope Elementary School in a week's time." Meg asked with a smile, "Hope Elementary School, which teacher Luna built, will be able to take in many children this semester. But has the school reopening date been decided?" "Yes." Amy nodded and said, "I want to give Jessica a school reopening gift. Can I give her a school bag? The kind that I made myself." Chapter 2236. Did you make it by yourself? Meg looked at Amy in surprise, wondering if her nameless system had given her a new mission. The little girl had no handwork experience at all. She didn't even know how to thread a needle. So how could she make a school bag for little Jessica? Amy nodded and said confidently, "Yeah, I think the school bag looks pretty simple. I should be able to learn it right away." Meg believed that it would be easy to learn it right away, but since the little girl was interested and could cultivate some hands-on skills, it could be a good opportunity for her practice. "Then I'll find a tutorial for you, and you can learn how to make it yourself." Meg walked out of the kitchen and picked up the tablet to find a sewing tutorial for a school bag for Amy. He deliberately chose a simpler one. Then he went upstairs to find a thick pink tarpaulin for Amy. It was more than enough to make a school bag. "Thank you, Father." Amy hugged the tablet and looked at it carefully behind the counter. She held a pair of scissors in her hand and started to follow the instructions as she looked at them. Meg looked at Amy, who was seriously cutting a crooked hole in the cloth, and his eyelids twitched. He turned around and went into the kitchen. Sure enough, it was easy to learn, but easy to learn. Anyway, if the mission couldn't be completed, it would be her system who would be anxious. As her father, all he had to do was provide enough materials. 10 minutes later, Amy looked at the ragged piece of cloth in her hand that looked like it had been bitten by a mouse. She blinked and looked at the square piece of cloth in the master's hand on the tablet. She nodded with satisfaction and said, "Sure enough, it looks better when I cut it." Yabamia and Anne, who were watching from the side, couldn't help but laugh. "Actually, I cut the lace on purpose," Amy explained to them, and took a pencil from the side and came forward. She drew a line of lace along the edge of the cloth that Amy had cut. Then she pointed at the cloth and gestured for Amy to cut along the line. "Then I'll try." Amy picked up the scissors again and carefully cut along the lines that and had drawn. After a while, a piece of cloth with a simple wavy border appeared. "Now it's neat and beautiful," Mia praised. "Thank you, Sister Anne." Amy happily looked at the cloth in her hand and began the next step, sewing. First, she needed a needle and a strong thread, which Meg had prepared for her. It took her a while to thread the thread through the needle hole. Then, she picked up the cloth and prepared to sew it. But after a few stitches and stopped her, loosened the thread, and let the cloth unfold. She then took out a pencil and made a series of small dots at the same distance along the edge of the cloth. She motioned for Amy to follow the dots. "Wow, this is so convenient, and I don't have to worry about the stitches being crooked." Amy's eyes lit up. She looked at and in admiration. "You're so smart," and smiled and stood to the side, watching her sewing with interest. She even helped her with the thread from time to time. Under Anne's supervision, about half an hour later, a simple school bag was made by Amy. The waterproof material was stiff, and the pink school bag had a small lace border. If one ignored the poor stitches, it looked quite exquisite. Amy measured her shoulders and added 2 small straps to the school bag. Then she tried it on her own. It looked quite decent. Meg poked his head out of the kitchen and looked at the school bag on Amy's shoulder. He smiled and said, "Well, it looks pretty good. Our Amy can make a school bag now." It was her first try, and she actually succeeded. This was a little beyond his expectations. Amy looked a little smug and said, "Hee hee, I told you I'm super awesome." She walked around with the school bag on her back and put it down. Looking at the blank space behind her, she couldn't help but ponder. "It seems like I'm missing something. Shall I draw something on it for you?" And said in sign language. Amy's eyes lit up at first, but she quickly shook her head. "No, I have to make it myself," and thought for a moment, and then signed again. "Then I'll draw it on that piece of cloth for you. You can cut it off and sew it on. Then it'll be yours." Okay. Big Sister Anne, you're so smart." Amy nodded and thought for a moment, and then drew the backs of 2 little girls holding hands on another piece of white cloth. She also drew a round orange beside them. "It's me and Jessica," Amy exclaimed in surprise. She looked at the round orange and said, "Can I not have Ugly Duckling? It looks a little ugly." "Ugly Duckling, meow meow. It's very cute," and reached out and patted Ugly Duckling's head. "Meow." Ugly Duckling squinted its eyes and rubbed its head against her hand. Favorability +1. "Okay, then I'll keep it." Amy picked up the scissors and began to cut off the 2 little people and Ugly Duckling skillfully. Then she sewed them on with a small needle and thread. After adding the 2 little people and Ugly Duckling to the blank space, it immediately became rich, and the whole school bag looked a lot cuter. "It's beautiful. Jessica will definitely like it." Amy smiled happily with the school bag in her hands. "Congratulations, host. You've completed the mission of sewing a school bag by yourself. You've received the title of Novice Tailor and Tailoring Proficiency." The system's voice sounded in her mind. "Tailoring Proficiency? What's that?" Amy asked, tilting her head. "After absorbing the experience pack, young master will receive a lifetime's worth of craftsmanship from a senior tailor. No matter how complicated the design is, you will be able to replicate it perfectly. This is tailoring proficiency." The system replied, "It doesn't sound very useful. I don't want to be a tailor." Amy wasn't very interested. Life Experience System. This year's host is indeed very difficult to manage. Such a valuable skill. It can even let you show off to the heavens in an industry. But it was actually said that it didn't sound very useful. However, what she said made a lot of sense. For people who didn't want to be a tailor, this skill did seem to be very useless. Young master, don't you want to be an excellent fashion designer? Don't you want to be a tailor that everyone admires? Now the opportunity is right in front of you. As long as you pick up that pair of scissors, you will become a god in the world of tailoring. The system tried to encourage her. "No, I don't want to." Amy refused decisively. However, she did pick up that pair of scissors and cut out a beautiful and delicate flower from 2 pieces of cloth. She sewed it on Ugly Duckling's head with a happy smile. "What a beautiful flower," and looked at the little flower and was a little stunned. She looked at Amy in surprise. How did she cut out such a delicate little flower with her bare hands in such a short time? Chapter 22:37. Understand now. Amy looked at Annie and rolled her big eyes. She nodded and said, "Now I know how to cut out nice bags and clothes." "Clothes can be made too?" And pointed at her clothes in surprise. "Okay." Amy nodded. She looked around and saw Ugly Duckling, and a smile appeared on her face. Ugly Duckling shrank into Anne's arms and had a bad feeling. "Let me make a shirt for Ugly Duckling. Everyone is wearing clothes, but it's naked. It's so embarrassing." Amy looked for cloth in the pile of materials. Ugly Duckling reached out its fat paw to indicate its natural fur coat. However, Amy ignored it. Let's make a pink one. Let's see if it's cuter. Amy picked up the unused pink fabric and gestured to Ugly Duckling. Then, she picked up the scissors and began to cut it. Mia, who was watching from the sidelines, gradually opened her mouth wide. Amy, who couldn't even cut a straight line, was now able to cut a symmetrical arc. It was even more accurate than the one Anne had drawn for her. A piece of cloth was quickly cut into shape in her hands. Be it her exquisite cutting skills or her calm demeanor, they both surprised Annie and Mia. After the fabric was cut, Amy picked up a needle and thread and began to sew. This time, the stitches weren't clumsy. Instead, they were dense and even and were perfectly hidden in the fabric. Even many tailors can't compare with her skills. How did Amy suddenly learn how to sew? Mia clicked her tongue in wonder. She was also terrible at sewing clothes. Meg also came out of the kitchen. He raised an eyebrow at the sight of the needle and thread in Amy's hands. It seemed that the system's reward had already arrived. It was most likely related to tailoring. It looked good, but it was a rather useless reward. Who would have so many clothes to sew? She had to go out and spend money to buy clothes in order to experience the charm of money. Women had so many pleasures. If she made her own clothes, wouldn't she be ruining one of the pleasures? Soon, the new clothes that Amy sewed for Ugly Duckling were ready. Ugly Duckling, come and try on your new raincoat. Amy waved at Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling looked at the pink raincoat in Amy's hands and was a little reluctant. However, it obediently crawled out of Anne's arms and jumped in front of Amy. Amy took it in her arms and put on its new clothes. The material was hard and waterproof, so Amy designed a raincoat for it. The waist was tightened so that it didn't drag the ground. The forelegs were also tightened. After the hairy hair was compressed, it looked smaller. A hood was designed for its head, and there were 2 small ears on the hood, just enough to hide its ears. The pink color, coupled with Ugly Duckling's round face and big eyes, was quite adorable. Good girl. Mia pinched Ugly Duckling's chubby face with a smile and said, "Your little sister, Ugly Duckling, now." And was also looking at Ugly Duckling with admiration. She gave Amy a thumbs up and said, "So pretty. Amy is so awesome. She can even make clothes. I can't even sew properly." Phyllis poked her head out of the kitchen to take a look and exclaimed in amazement, "Yeah, her skills are even better than our tailors." Barbara was also looking at Ugly Duckling with amazement. It was her favorite color, pink. In the end, her gaze fell on Amy, and she said with a smile, "Amy, why don't you make a little dress for me? I'll give you some candy to eat." "What candy?" Amy's eyes lit up at the mention of food. "It's crescent candy that can only be found on the moon. I'll get them to bring me some next time they come. It's soft and sweet and super delicious," Barbara strongly recommended. "Sure, I want to eat crescent candy." Amy swallowed her saliva. She looked at Barbara and asked, "Then what kind of dress do you want, big sister Barbara?" "I want." Barbara didn't know what to say. She wanted a pretty dress, but this clearly wasn't the answer Amy wanted. She looked around, and her gaze fell on, and as she pleaded, "Baby, and can you design a pretty dress for me? I'll get them to bring you a picture book of the moon next time. There are many amazing artists in the Moon Nation." Sure enough, an interested look appeared on Anne's face. After a brief moment of consideration, she nodded in agreement. "Good girl." Barbara smiled. Anne's drawings were really beautiful, so she would definitely be able to design something for Amy. Everyone else was in awe, but they weren't in a hurry to make a reservation. After all, Amy couldn't even hold a pair of scissors properly in the past. She had suddenly become a master tailor. Amy admired her masterpiece for a while, but still decided to help Ugly Duckling take off its raincoat. The material of the raincoat was cold and hard. It was suitable to be worn as a tool suit, but it wasn't comfortable to wear on a daily basis. She would go upstairs later to see if there was a better and more comfortable material for Ugly Duckling to make a new raincoat. It seems like being a tailor is quite fun. Amy had received everyone's approval, and she felt a sense of accomplishment. She wasn't so against being a tailor anymore. Of course, the most important thing was that making clothes could be exchanged for food. "Young mistress, now that our factory has expanded, perhaps we can consider opening a branch. Here are the research reports for Rodu, Demon Islands, and Dragon Island. Mars placed a stack of documents on Gloria's desk. Gloria didn't immediately flip through the thick stack of documents. Instead, she looked at Mars and asked, "According to the research reports, which region is the most suitable for opening the first branch?" According to the reports, Rodu should be the most suitable as there are many human nobles in Rodu, and they can spend a lot of money. Furthermore, humans have relatively uniform bodies, so it's easier to control the size of their clothes. Compared to other races, which are all different in size, the cost of distributing goods there will be significantly lower. This is also a result of the experience accumulated by Suede. Mars replied, "It's just as I've envisioned. If we open a new branch in Rodu, we can use the same batch of goods as Suede." Gloria nodded. She turned to Mars and said, "I need a capable person to go to Rodu and open up a new market. Mars, you might have to make a trip there in person." Mars was a little surprised to hear this. "Young mistress, I'd rather stay by your side and assist you. You know that I don't have many trustworthy people around me. Cyril and Grandma have already returned, and they've been making a fuss recently. I need better results to shut them up," Gloria said. "Thank you for your trust." Mars bowed slightly before standing up straight again. He said in a serious voice, "I'm willing to go to Rodu and open up a new market for you." Chapter 2238. Hocatelin returned to Rodu that night. Although the delicacies at Mamie's were irresistible, there were still many important matters waiting for him to settle in Rodu. Garland went back with them. As the chief editor of Whole Foods, his work was a complete mess after staying in Chaos City for a month. He still had to go back and plan the next issue of the magazine. The 10 gourmet magazines would receive Mag's column, and whoever did the best would reap the most benefits from this bonus. Meanwhile, Milo was ordered to stay behind and guard Chaos City. His job was to come to Mamie's every day to eat and keep an eye out for news from the printing factory. At the same time, he would submit 3 articles about Mamie's delicacies every month. His workload had tripled, but he accepted the 3,000 copper coins daily allowance happily. Although Mr. Mack had already appeared personally, the audience was not satisfied with his short column. Milo felt that such a life was very comfortable to be able to eat delicious food and ride on Mr. Mack's popularity. "Milo, I heard that Whole Foods made a beautiful comeback with the help of Mr. Mack." Randy greeted with a smile as he stood diagonally behind Meg. "Yes, we sold millions of copies and broke the ceiling." Milo turned back with a smile, with a smug look on his face. Just as he was about to say something, he saw the young woman in a gorgeous dress beside Randy. She was sexy and charming, and exuded a mature charm. He was not so happy anymore. Mr. Mack is indeed a genius. If he were to change careers, you wouldn't be able to make a living, Randy said with a smile as he hugged the young woman's soft and voluptuous waist. Yes, he was talking about them. Randy, no longer relied on royalties to make a living. He was living off a woman of the highest quality. "It's okay. Although Mr. Mack's products are exquisite, the production is low. It's not a problem for me to make a living," Milo said softly. Why were the rich women he heard about all burly, with exposed nose hair and weird hobbies? But Randy was so beautiful, generous, and obedient. "Betty, this is the gourmet Milo that I mentioned to you before. He's quite famous in the industry. Just like your husband." Randy introduced him to the rich woman in his arms. "Hello, Mr. Milo." Betty looked at Milo and nodded slightly, indifferent. "Hello." Milo hurriedly nodded, wondering why Randy was suddenly introducing him to a rich woman. "Betty, didn't you say 2 days ago that one of your sisters was feeling depressed and didn't want to eat?" Milo happened to be in Chaos City recently, so why not introduce them to each other? He's a professional when it comes to food, Randy said with a smile. Milo was stunned and looked at Randy. What was going on? Randy winked at him and gave him a knowing smile. Betty scrutinized Milo with a hesitant expression and whispered in Randy's ear, "Tafina likes young and handsome men. This friend of yours might not be your type. You'll get tired of young and handsome men after playing with them for a long time. You see, she's been sad because of young and handsome men recently. Why don't we give her a change of taste? Maybe what she needs now is a warm and sensual embrace," Randy said with a chuckle. As he spoke, he even blew gently into her ear. Betty's ears were red all the way to her ears. She nodded with a smile when Randy blew into her ear and said, "Where do you live, Mr. Milo? I have a friend. Maybe you can meet her." Milo wanted to refuse at first. As a burly man who weighed more than 100 kilograms, living off a woman was something he could never do. However, when she caught a glimpse of the corner of Randy's shirt and saw the bunch of keys, the words that were about to come out of her mouth stopped. She thought to herself that if that rich woman also looked like the one Randy had hooked up with, it wouldn't be a loss. "I'm staying at Sarna Hotel. I've been staying in Chaos City recently, so I'm quite free. If I'm lucky enough to treat that lady to a meal, it would naturally be my honor," Milo said with a smile. Randy gave him a thumbs up with his hand that was hanging by his side. The restaurant opened, and Randy invited Milo to eat at the same table. At the dining table, he managed to get a lot of useful information from Betty. After the meal, the three of them walked out of the restaurant. Randy waved at Betty and said, "You go back to our horse-drawn carriage first. I'll have a chat with my friend." "All right, I'll wait for you." Betty glanced at him and returned to the horse-drawn carriage with a sway of her hips. "Bro, you're living off a woman. I'm impressed." Milo was full of admiration. Randy put his arm around Milo's shoulder and brought him to the side. He softly said, "Don't say I didn't bring you along. Now that the opportunity is here, you have to grasp it. Her sister, Tafina, her husband has been dead for 3 years. Her family really has an iron mind. If you can get her, you won't be able to write any articles in the future." "I'm afraid I can't do it." Milo shook his head and sighed. Without much confidence, he said, "You know I'm not good with words. Guts, meticulous, thick-skinned. You just have to grasp these 3 points, and you'll basically be in the bag. Oh, right. Don't lick her immediately. That'll ruin our image as great writers. Basically, you'll be kicked out after being toyed with for a while." Randy preached leisurely. "I can't lick her? Then my bootlicker skills are useless, right? You have to be more reserved. It's best if she can lick you. That's how you'll be a winner in life." Randy reached out to pat him on the shoulder and smilingly said, "You're the head gourmet of Whole Food Mart. Bring out your professionalism, and I guarantee no woman can resist." "Professionalism? Then we're talking about delicacies." Milo seemed to understand a little. "Let's go. Someone should be looking for you tomorrow. Wait at the inn. Go and find a better barbershop. Fix your beard and hair, and change into a more fitting set of clothes." Randy smiled as he walked towards the horse-drawn carriage at the side. Just as he reached the carriage, Betty had already opened the door and was waiting for him. "Do I still have to fix my hair?" Milo touched his stubbled face and curly hair, and mumbled as he walked towards the barbershop not far away. He, Milo, was not trying to live off a woman. He just wanted to give a melancholic rich lady a warm home. "Do you want your literary friends to stay in Chaos City?" Betty asked as she lay in Randy's arms. Her face was flushed as she allowed that restless hand to roam around her clothes as she panted slightly. Randy slowly stroked and felt the softness on his fingertips. However, his face was cold and aloof as he calmly said, "It's this city's fortune to be able to let these talented young people stay." Chapter 2239. The resumption of Mamie's business was probably the happiest thing for the foodies in Chaos City. Recently, apart from the local customers of Chaos City, there were also many customers who came from all over the world just to try Mamie's food, which had been praised to the skies by all the major gourmet magazines. They had come in high spirits and returned in high spirits. That was how most of the customers felt. However, not everyone could come to Chaos City easily. For example, Vanessa, who was far away in the royal palace in Rodu, couldn't say anything to comfort her mother, even though her eyes were red when she saw her tear-stricken mother. A few days ago, news of victory came from the front lines, but at the same time, another piece of news came, and it was like a bolt from the blue that struck her and her mother's hearts. Josh was dead. Her second elder brother was dead. Although they all said that he was a bad guy, an idiot who sold his soul to the devil, and a bastard who almost destroyed this world, she still remembered him in her memories. However, in her memories, he was a gentle older brother who would secretly bring her delicious food. He was the older brother who would stand up to protect her when others mocked her. She was glad that the Allied army had defeated the undead army and saved the Norland continent from destruction. However, she couldn't feel happy when she heard the news of Josh's death. Her mother loved her second elder brother the most. When she first heard that he had become a devil's puppet, she was already anxious day and night and couldn't sleep. In the past few days, she had been crying every day, and she couldn't eat. She was getting thinner day by day, and her face was pale and yellow. Her heart ached for her mother. "Mother, have some porridge. Let me feed you." Vanessa took a bowl of warm red bean porridge from the palace made beside her. It was the queen's favorite dessert. However, just as the porridge was about to reach the queen's mouth, she smelled the heat and suddenly turned her head to retch. She vomited a few mouthfuls of yellowish acid and waved her hand with a pale face. Vanessa passed the porridge to the palace maid and wiped the corners of her mouth with a silk handkerchief. The imperial physician said that her mother was suffering from excessive grief, and if she still couldn't eat, she might not be able to hold on. She had been holding on with the few mouthfuls of magic medicine that she had swallowed. "Mother, mother!" Vanessa gently hugged the empress and couldn't help but cry. "Your father is too cruel. If he had chosen Sean as the crown prince back then and cut off Josh's hopes, he wouldn't have lost his life for the throne. 2 children and a throne. You're going to make me lose one of my children." The queen spat out a mouthful of blood. The corner of her lips was bright red, and it made her face look even paler. The palace maids cowered and lowered their heads, not daring to speak. "Mother, let me bring you out for a walk. Let's go to Chaos City. Let's go to Mamie's. I'll bring you to eat something delicious. Let's go for a walk." Vanessa picked up a thick coat and draped it over the queen. Then she turned around and instructed, "Go and prepare the flying steed. I'm going to bring Mother to Chaos City tonight. Princess, it's already late at night, and Her Majesty's body is weak. I'm afraid His Majesty will not allow you to leave the palace at this time." The chief palace maid said hesitantly. The princess was a little capricious, and they couldn't bear the responsibility. "You." Vanessa frowned, but she knew she didn't have the right to do so. "I'm leaving." At this moment, the queen, whose gaze had been wandering, suddenly sat up straight. She looked at the palace maid and said, "Go and report to His Majesty that I'm leaving the palace." "Yes," the palace maid quickly replied and left in a hurry. "Mother." Vanessa looked at her mother, who had suddenly regained some energy and was overjoyed. "Help me change." The queen couldn't hide her fatigue, but her voice was firm. The palace maids quickly got busy. They helped the queen change into thick and warm clothes, and even draped a large fox fur coat over her. That palace maid returned quickly and said that His Majesty had agreed to let the queen and princess leave the palace. The flying steed was already prepared. Vanessa was surprised by her father's wisdom, but she still helped the queen onto a huge flying steed. There was a magnificent palace on its broad back. This was the golden-winged eagle that the king would only ride when he was out. "To Chaos City," Vanessa ordered. 10 odd flying steeds took off and flew towards the moonlit night. They left the city and headed south. After they were 50 kilometers out of the city, the queen, who had been silent all this while, suddenly said, "Let them turn around and go north." "Go north? Mother, aren't we going to Chaos City?" Vanessa exclaimed. She thought that with her friendship with Mr. Mac, even if they reached Chaos City in the middle of the night, it shouldn't be a problem to ask Mr. Mac to cook a meal for her mother. However, her mother had changed her mind and wanted to go north. "I want to see Josh personally. Otherwise, I won't be able to rest in peace for the rest of my life," the queen said firmly. "But you want me to go out and give the order?" The queen looked at her. Vanessa's heart sank. She turned around and said, "The queen has ordered us to turn around and head to the extreme north." After the order was given, the flying steeds stopped. There was a small commotion outside, but the flying steeds quickly turned around and flew towards the north. "Cinderella really wants to see it personally." At the top of the palace tower, Andre looked at the sky in the north with a complicated expression. In just a few days, his sideburns had turned white, and he looked much older. More than 10 flying mounts slowly landed 5 kilometers away from the Devil's Seal. The guards had already marked their position. Balls of fire lit up on the ice field. There were even level 10 guardians rushing in their direction and surrounding them. "This is the Roth Empire's Queen's Guard. Do not attack," the guard captain shouted. The guards were still looking at them warily, and they didn't put down their weapons. A 10th-tier knight rushed over and was slightly shocked to see the golden-winged condor. He went forward and respectfully said, "Greetings, Queen. May I ask what brings you here in the middle of the night?" This was the Devil's Seal that the allied forces of all races were guarding together. Even if he was an officer of the Roth Empire, and the person who came was the Queen, he still had to follow the rules and ask questions. Syndra was helped out of the palace by Vanessa. She looked at the 10th-tier knight and said, "I'm sorry for the sudden visit tonight. I want to see my son, Josh." The expressions of the various guardians suddenly became unfriendly. Even that 10th-tier knight's expression stiffened. The human knights and magic casters among the guardians also turned their faces away. The Queen's son, Josh, had died on this battlefield. However, his death wasn't something to be proud of. It was exchanged with the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers of the Allied forces. The blood of the soldiers had yet to dry, but the Queen of the Roth Empire came to the front line to pay respects to her son. What a ridiculous and hateful thing. The Guardians only felt a chill in their hearts, and they couldn't hide the anger in their eyes when they looked at Syndra. Vanessa had never seen such a scene before. She grabbed Syndra's arm instinctively and was a little scared. The Queen's guards also tightened their defenses and looked at the Guardians around them warily. "I hate devils as much as you all do, but I'm just an ordinary mother now. I just want to take a look at the place where my son was last standing. I just want to take a closer look," Syndra said, holding back her grief. Chapter 2240. The Alliance Guardians looked at Syndra. This noble queen looked so sad and weak at the moment. They had lost their comrades and friends, and she had indeed lost her son. The source of all of this came from the devil under the seal formation. The Imperial general stepped to the side and made way for them. The protectors of the Alliance army parted to form a path that led straight to the sealing formation. Thank you. Syndra bowed deeply to the Guardians with Vanessa's help, and then walked down the steps slowly and weakly. This place was 5 miles away from the core of the seal. Syndra looked at the black shadow that rose from the ice field in the darkness and walked forward. "Mother!" Vanessa supported her thin body and walked forward on the smooth ice. It was too cold here. Even though she was wearing thick, cotton-padded clothes, she could still feel the bone-chilling cold. The cold air that she breathed into her lungs was like an ice blade, not to mention walking on the smooth ice surface. Every step she took was exceptionally difficult. Her mother's body was so weak that she would collapse on the road before she finished the 5-mile journey. "Get a sled for Queen Syndra," a dragon powerhouse said. Soon, a sled and a group of sled dogs were sent over. Vanessa expressed her gratitude and helped Syndra onto the sled. She covered her with a thick blanket, and a mage came forward to hold up a thermal magic barrier. Soon, the sled arrived at the towering seal. Syndra stood up and looked at the dark seal array formation. Tears streamed down her face. After a long while, she looked at the sky and murmured, "Josh, let's go. Your soul should go to a cleaner place. This is the last time I'm here to see you. I will use the rest of my life to repay the sins you have committed." A strange wind suddenly blew on the ice field, and the snow swirled around the seal a few times before dissipating. Syndra looked at this scene in a daze. Then, a smile appeared on her face, and she collapsed in Vanessa's arms. "Royal Doctor! Royal Doctor!" Vanessa exclaimed as she hugged Syndra. Royal doctors and healing magicians immediately stepped forward. One of them diagnosed the queen, while the other immediately used healing magic to stabilize her condition. "Your Highness, the queen's condition is even worse than before. We can only temporarily stabilize her condition, but if she still refuses to eat, I'm afraid." The imperial physician hesitated, but his meaning was clear. Vanessa's expression changed slightly, but she quickly calmed down and ordered, bring Mother back to the palace immediately, and then set off for Chaos City. Then, she jumped off the sled and bowed to the guard again to express her gratitude and apology. She turned around to look at the towering seal and the vast, icy plains. Then she got on the sled and left without looking back. After seeing the battle line of the polar ice plains with her own eyes, she suddenly felt less sad because she felt the difficulties of the Allied soldiers. They had come here to fight against the million undead army in real time, all for the sake of protecting the people behind the mountain range. Joshua chose to become the devil's puppet, and from that moment onwards, he was no longer the second brother that she was familiar with. It was a blessing for the Norland continent that he had died here. It was also a blessing for the billions of citizens of the Roth Empire. The flying steed took off again and flew towards the south. Early the next morning, the sun rose slowly from the horizon, and its light shone on the land. Cinderella, who had slept with a fever for the night, woke up. She walked to the window with Vanessa's help and saw the sun shining on Chaos City, awakening this sleeping city. Looking down at this big city from the sky, the various buildings were exotic, and it was a completely different scenery from Rodu. A smile appeared on Cinderella's pale face, as if she had felt the beauty of life again. Vanessa, who had stayed by the bed without sleeping for the whole night, saw the smile on Cinderella's face and couldn't hide her joy. She coquettishly said, "Mother, we've reached Chaos City. I'll bring you to have Mr. Mac's breakfast. We'll have tofu pudding." "All right." Cinderella looked at her and reached out to touch her face gently. Her heart ached as she said, "I must have scared you these few days. As long as Mother is fine, I'm fine." Vanessa shook her head and hugged Cinderella gently. She sobbed, "Mother, I will be by your side." Cinderella patted her back gently and smiled with relief. After the Queen's team coordinated with Chaos City, the golden-winged condor received permission to enter the city and landed in the Aiden Square. This is the Aiden Square. Amy's is in the southwest corner of the square, Vanessa introduced as she held Cinder's arm. Cinderella looked around and softly said, "The last time I came here was almost 20 years ago. You weren't even born then." "Mother, you've been to Chaos City before too?" Vanessa was shocked. Cinderella nodded slightly and said, "I've followed your father on many expeditions. Apart from a twilight forest, I've been to all the territories on the Norland continent." There was a horse-drawn carriage attached to the palace. Vanessa helped Cinderella into the carriage and went straight to Amy's. The sky was just starting to brighten, and it was only 6 a.m. Amy's wasn't open yet, and there were no customers queuing in front of the door. Vanessa looked at Cinderella, who was leaning weakly against the carriage, and jumped off the carriage. She jogged to the door and rang the bell on the door. She knew Mr. Mac's rules, but her mother hadn't eaten for too long and was so weak that she could faint at any time. The royal doctor said that if she fainted again, she might not be able to wake up again. She still couldn't eat normal food, so her only hope was now on Meg. Vanessa rang the bell for a while, and the restaurant's door finally opened. "Vanessa." Meg looked at Vanessa, who was standing at the door, in shock. After not seeing her for a while, Vanessa looked much thinner. Her eyes were red and swollen, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She couldn't hide her fatigue and looked like she hadn't rested well for a long time. She was no longer the heartless glutton she used to be. "Mr. Mac, please, can you make breakfast for my mother? She hasn't eaten for 3 days and 3 nights. The royal doctor said that if she doesn't eat soon, her life might be in danger." Vanessa went up and grabbed Meg's arm, as if she was clutching at a life-saving straw. Meg looked at the luxurious horse-drawn carriage behind them. Judging from Vanessa's words, the Queen of the Roth Empire should be sitting inside. In the square further back, a golden condor was shining brightly. Vanessa came all the way from Rodu with the Queen so early in the morning just to ask for breakfast. Although he didn't know what was going on, Meg still nodded and said, "Come in first." Chapter 22:41. Meg was also a little surprised when he saw Vanessa and the palace maids helping Cinderella out of the carriage. In his memory, the Queen had always been dignified and elegant. She spoke softly and slowly, and she was gentle and kind. However, she now looked pale and skinny, and there were still some silver strands in her hair. It was as if she had aged more than 10 years in an instant. Meg had already thought of the reason. It seemed that Josh's death had brought her great sorrow. No matter what kind of demon he was in the eyes of the world, in her heart, he was still the child that she had given birth to and raised painstakingly. Meg couldn't develop any feelings of disgust towards such a mother. Instead, he thought about how he had fallen into the water and died. He wondered if that cold woman would be sad too. Meg stepped aside and watched as Vanessa and the palace maids helped Vanessa into the room and sat down. The heater was on in the dining room, and the temperature was very comfortable. Vanessa helped Cinderella untie the fox fur coat and draped it over the chair so that she could lean comfortably against the back of the chair. "What do you want to eat?" Meg poured 2 cups of warm water for the mother and daughter and added 2 drops of life water. "Thank you." Cinderella nodded slightly at Meg. She held the crystal cup with her cold hands and felt the warmth. She picked up the cup and took a sip of the water. The sweet life water touched her chapped lips and nourished her gently. The faint fragrance slid down her throat, and it was as if the dry earth had suddenly been nourished by a spring. She couldn't help but relax her eyebrows. Life water wasn't considered a precious item in the royal family, but after slowly drinking a cup of water, Cinderella felt that she was alive again. She felt the hunger, the weakness of her body, and the desire for food. "Mother, what would you like to eat?" Vanessa pushed the menu in front of Cinderella. She also scanned the menu and couldn't help but swallow when she saw the new dishes. "Give me some," Cinderella said with a smile. Vanessa looked at it for a while and said, "Then I'll order you a congee with pork and century egg, 2 soup dumplings, and a cup of soy milk." The soup dumplings are a new product. I haven't eaten them before, but they look good. "All right." Cinderella nodded. Meg looked at Vanessa closing the menu and couldn't help but smile. "What about you? What are you eating?" "Me?" Vanessa was surprised. She shook her head and said, "It's not business hours now. I can't trouble Mr. Mac to cook for me. It's already very good of you to cook for my mother. Let's try the shaved noodles. It's a new dish that was released the day before yesterday. Also, give me 2 soup dumplings." Meg turned around and walked into the kitchen with a smile, not giving Vanessa a chance to refuse. This girl's eyes were green with envy when she looked at the menu, but she still resisted the urge to eat. "This Mr. Meg is really a good person." Cinderella looked at Meg's back and smiled gently. However, when she saw him pick up the kitchen knife, she was slightly stunned. She seemed to feel that his side profile was a little familiar, but she couldn't remember who he looked like. "Yes, Mr. Mac is a super good person. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be able to eat now." Vanessa nodded and looked at Meg in the kitchen with her chin in her hand. Her eyes were filled with the dough that was constantly changing forms in his hands. The dough was distributed in advance last night, but the soup dumplings and shaved noodles had to be made on the spot. Fortunately, the congee with pork and century egg for the cleaners was cooking in the pot, and it was just right. He scooped a bowl for Queen Cinderella and brought it out to let her fill her stomach first. The congee with pork and century egg that had just come out of the pot was steaming hot. There were a few green onions scattered on the surface, and the fragrance of the meat was already wafting over. Cinderella, who hadn't eaten for a few days, smelled the fragrance of the meat, and her stomach was already growling uncontrollably. Her eyes were fixed on the congee in front of her. Bits of lean meat were hidden in the snow-white congee, and there were pieces of century egg that had an amber-like texture. The green onions made the congee even brighter. "It's a little hot. Mother, be careful." Vanessa took the spoon and put it in the bowl as she softly reminded her. "Okay." Cinder found it a little funny. When she was young, she always reminded the little one to be careful of the heat. Now it was the other way around, and she felt warm in her heart. She scooped up a spoonful of congee with a spoon, blew on it gently, and put it into her mouth. The warm congee melted in her mouth. It was sticky, but the texture was exceptionally smooth. The shredded meat was also soft. When she bit into it gently, the fragrance of the meat wantonly in her mouth. It was fresh and delicious. After swallowing it, she felt a warm current slide down her throat into her stomach slowly. Her stomach that had been tortured by hunger for many days warmed up, and she felt comfortable all over. The century egg was slightly springy and had a special fragrance, giving this bowl of congee a deeper taste. Her original resistance to food was completely defeated in this mouthful of congee. The queen is eating. The palace maid at the side covered her mouth in surprise. One had to know that the palace chefs had been racking their brains to make all kinds of food for the queen these past few days, but she didn't even eat a single bite. She didn't expect that she would eat a simple bowl of congee now. Mother really knows how to eat the food made by Mr. Mac. Vanessa was also overjoyed and excited. Fortunately, she wasn't desperate. Otherwise, she wouldn't know how to explain it to her father. Sindra ate one mouthful after another, and in a short while, the entire bowl of congee with pork and century egg was gone. She was stunned when she saw the bottom of the bowl of congee. Only then did she realize that she had been wolfing down the food just now, and couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Fortunately, there was no one else in the dining hall. Meg was also busy in the kitchen, and probably didn't see it. "Is it good?" Vanessa asked with a smile as she wiped the corner of her mouth with a silk handkerchief. "It's the most delicious congee I've ever eaten." Sindra nodded with a smile. After this bowl of congee, Sindra felt that she had recovered a lot of her strength, and her spirit became more active. The haze in her heart was swept away, and she seemed to feel that life had become more hopeful. If the rising sun in the morning gave her the courage to start afresh, then this bowl of congee made her feel the beauty of life again. The warmth warmed her heart, and the delicious taste brought her a long-lost happiness. This is soup dumplings. There's a simple introduction on the menu. The soup inside is very hot, so be careful when you eat it. Meg came out with 2 baskets of soup dumplings. There were 3 in each basket, and he placed them in front of Sindra and Vanessa. "Thank you, Mr. Mac." Vanessa blinked at him gratefully. Meg just smiled and turned to go back into the kitchen. He was the one who killed Josh, but with the addition of new and old grudges, and with the addition of getting rid of evil for the people, Meg didn't feel guilty at all. This breakfast was for Vanessa, and it had nothing to do with Josh. Chapter 2242. The congee with pork and century egg was the appetizer. Seeing the white, tender, and bulging soup dumplings, Sindra looked forward to it even more. It looked so bouncy. Vanessa poked the soup dumpling gently with a finger. The soup dumpling trembled slightly and swayed gently. It was soft to the touch, but it didn't lose its tenacity. How am I supposed to eat such a thin skin wrapped in such a rich soup? Sindra looked at the soup dumpling that looked like it was going to explode at any time, and was a little troubled. "Let me see." Vanessa flipped open the menu, and quickly found the section for soup dumplings. There was indeed a row of how to eat written in small font at the bottom. Use your chopsticks to gently pick up the small lump on the top of the soup dumpling and transfer it to your shallow soup bowl. Then, use your mouth to gently bite a hole diagonally above it. After the soup has warmed up, take a small sip of soup before eating the thin skin and meat filling. As Vanessa recited, she learned how to pick up a soup dumpling. The round soup dumpling was elongated and looked like it was going to explode at any moment. However, it was still tenacious, and she successfully transferred it to the shallow bowl in front of her. "It's a success," Vanessa exclaimed in surprise as she heaved a sigh of relief. She didn't expect the thin, translucent skin to be so tenacious. Sindra found it interesting. She also picked up her chopsticks and carefully picked up a soup dumpling to put in her bowl. She was afraid that it would break or fall on the table, and that made her clench her other fist nervously. The two of them stared at each other for a while. Sindra, who was salivating, couldn't help but touch the skin of the soup dumpling. It was warm to the touch, and she said, "I think it's done." As she said that, she bent down and took a small bite on the soup dumpling. The rich soup immediately gushed out from her small mouth. "Hiss, it's hot." The soup dumpling had just come out of the oven. Although the thin and tenacious skin had warmed up slightly, the soup inside was still hot. She opened her mouth and took a bite, and the delicious soup gushed into her mouth. The fragrance of the crab roe was intoxicating, and the soup was so delicious that it instantly disarmed her taste buds and made her unable to stop herself. As for the burning sensation, before it could ferment, it was completely suppressed by the delicious taste. After a while, the soup was almost finished. She picked up the remaining skin and meat filling and took a bite. The dough was chewy, and the meat dumpling that was soaked in juice was neither greasy nor fat. It was smooth in the mouth, and together with the taste of the crab meat and crab roe, it really made Cinderella's eyebrows relax. If the congee with pork and century egg was an appetizer, then the soup dumplings, which were full of meat and extremely delicious, allowed her to experience the beauty of food and the joy of living. That's right. Only by being alive would one be able to experience such magical food. Not only could they taste the delicious meat broth, they could also taste the flexibility of the pastries, and they could also taste the meat. It was just a small soup dumpling. How much ingenuity did the chef put into it to bring such a unique experience to the customers? She really found it interesting. She even had a desire to find out for herself how the soup dumplings were made and how the thick meaty aroma was infused into the thin dough. With her status, she had never been to a kitchen in her life, let alone cook for herself. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but shake her head with a smile. Wow, this is too delicious. Mr. Mac actually secretly made such a delicious breakfast behind my back. Vanessa, who was sitting opposite her, also ate a soup dumpling. Her mouth was glistening with oil as she exclaimed excitedly. A basket of delicious soup dumplings brought surprise and hope to the tired and sad mother and daughter. It even made them forget their sadness temporarily. After all, there were so many beautiful things in life, right? They sipped the soup and chewed the meat filling and the skin of the dumplings, savoring the delicacies that they couldn't even eat in the Rodu Palace. Gulp! The palace maid at the side swallowed her saliva and tried her best to look away. As the queen's personal palace maid, she had received professional training. Even if she was faced with exotic delicacies, she would definitely not be greedy. But today, seeing the queen and the princess eating the soup dumplings and smelling the fragrance of crab roe and meat, her defenses were easily broken. What kind of divine smell is this? Even the various delicacies that the royal chefs in the palace sent to the harem every day had never brought such a shock to her. Of course, the more important thing was the feeling of curiosity. What exactly did the soup dumplings with such a magical fragrance taste like? What was the difference between the soup wrapped in the skin and ordinary meat soup? Vanessa bit open the third soup dumpling and leaned over to take a small sip. When she looked up, she happened to see Meg holding a bowl of dough in the kitchen and holding a kitchen knife in one hand as he shaved the dough. The dough flew out of the dough and jumped into the boiling soup like silver fish. As he swung the knife, it almost became a line. Vanessa didn't want to let go of the dumpling in her mouth, but she still reached out her finger to signal Cinderella to look in the direction of the kitchen. Cinderella turned around and looked with a hint of surprise in her eyes. Meg was shaving the noodles. This scene looked like an artistic performance. His movements were skillful and natural, his expression was calm, but his eyes were bright. After a while, the last piece of dough jumped into the pot. He put away the knife, put down the dough, and picked up the spoon to get busy again. Soon, Meg walked out of the kitchen with a bowl of braised beef noodles and placed it in front of Vanessa. Pieces of beef covered the entire bowl of noodles. At a glance, there was a sense of satisfaction. Mr. Mac, did you add meat especially for me? Vanessa looked up at Meg and asked with sparkling eyes. No, every customer is like this. Meg shook his head. You don't even know how to make a girl happy. Vanessa pursed her lips. He was indeed a man of steel. But I added an egg for the record, Meg said with a smile, and turned to enter the kitchen. Vanessa used her chopsticks to move the beef aside. As expected, a fried golden egg was revealed. A sweet smile appeared on her face. She took a small bowl and filled it with a bowl of noodles for Cinderella. She scooped 2 spoonfuls of braised beef into a mini bowl of noodles. I'm already full. Cinderella was about to say something when Vanessa fed her a piece of braised beef. The soft braised meat almost melted in her mouth, but it didn't lose its chewiness. The mellowness of the beef had been completely activated by the seasoning. The more she chewed, the more fragrant it became. It formed a lingering aftertaste that was intoxicating. I think I can eat a little more. Cinderella took the bowl and picked up a piece of noodles. The noodles were as white as snow and were much wider than the usual noodles. They weren't even squares, but were shaped like willow leaves. The sides were slightly thinner, and the middle was slightly thicker. The edges were distinct. Chapter 22:43. The noodles entered her mouth, and they were soft and smooth without losing their chewiness. They were soaked in the bone broth, and every bite was very fragrant. Cinderella raised her eyebrows in amazement. It was completely different from the noodles she usually ate. After finishing the beef and noodles, she had a mouthful of broth. This broth was bone broth, and it was as white as milk. It was obvious that it had been simmered for a long time. It was so fragrant that she couldn't bear to leave any broth behind after finishing the noodles. She finished the small bowl of knife-shaved noodles with a slurp. This time, Cinderella really felt full. She hadn't eaten for 3 days, but she didn't feel uncomfortable even though she had eaten quite a lot. Instead, she felt refreshed and her body was warm and comfortable. She leaned back comfortably in the chair with a smile on her rosy face as she looked at Vanessa, who was eating seriously with her head lowered. As a lady, she didn't look elegant when she was eating, but she found it adorable. As long as she was happy, it didn't seem that important to her to be elegant. Vanessa picked up a fried egg and took a bite. The soft egg was soaked in a broth and had a hint of beef aroma. The crispiness of the egg itself was even more alluring. Vanessa looked up at Cinderella and swallowed the egg in her mouth as she asked, "Mother, do you want some more? I'm already full. I can't even finish the soy milk that hasn't been served yet." Cinderella shook her head with a smile. She had a small appetite to begin with. She was already surprised that she could eat so much in the morning. Vanessa smiled and nodded. "MHM, then I'll bring you out to play after we're done. There are many fun places in Chaos City. You definitely didn't see them when you came with Royal Father the last time." "All right." Cinderella nodded. After finishing this bowl of knife-shaved noodles and the 3 soup dumplings from before, Vanessa's fatigue was swept away. She was full of energy again. Vanessa got up and skipped to the kitchen door. She looked at Meg, who was making the tofu pudding, and said, "Mr. Mac, I'll get the bill. This meal is on me." Meg turned around and said with a smile, "No, you've made such a sumptuous breakfast for us so early in the morning, which has completely increased your burden. How can we let you get free food?" Vanessa looked at the tofu pudding in front of Meg and swallowed her saliva. She took out her money pouch and placed a handful of dragon coins on the counter. "Thank you." Vanessa bowed to Meg again and winked at him playfully. "Then I won't disturb you any longer. I'm going to take my mother out to play." "Thank you, mister." Cinderella also stood up and thanked Meg. When she saw Chaos City today, she was already determined to live again. But after having breakfast at Amy's, she made up her mind. This time, she was going to change her way of living. "You're too kind." Meg nodded slightly. To him, it was just making breakfast for a friend in advance. It was nothing. After watching the two of them leave, Meg casually put half of the dragon coins on the counter into his pocket. Before he could put the other half into the money box, Irina's voice sounded from the stairs. "Yo, we haven't even opened yet, and business is already here." Irina, who was wearing a thin nightgown, walked down the stairs with a smile. Her lithe figure was faintly discernible under the thin nightgown. She walked up to Meg and wrapped her arms around his neck gently. She moved closer to his ear and whispered, "Is it enough? If it's not enough, you can get more." A faint fragrance wafted into his nose, and her voice was even more pleasant. However, the words that came out of her mouth made Meg's expression stiffen. "It should be enough to buy groceries today." Meg nodded naturally and took out a money bag marked with grocery money from his pocket. "Why don't you count it?" Irina looked at the money bag with a playful look. She drew circles on his chest with her finger and chuckled. "You've really done a lot for this family. In order to let you and your mother live a good life, it's what I should do," Meg said with a righteous look. Irina burst into laughter. She let go of Meg's hand and sat down on a chair at the side. She smiled and said, "Why did Vanessa bring Cinderella here?" Meg looked at the beautiful smile on her face. His heart was moved. He was the only one who could appreciate such charm. After all, in the eyes of outsiders, Irina was an unattainable princess of the elves and a terrifying 10th-tier magic caster. However, in front of him, she was more like a woman. She had no burdens and could flirt, joke, and occasionally scold. She had a fiery temperament, but she was also more adorable and interesting. "To heal," Meg said. "To heal." Irina's expression was a little strange. "If she knows that Josh died at our hands, I wonder if she'll vomit blood." To be precise, Josh died at the hands of demons. It has nothing to do with us. The one we killed was just a shell that had completely lost its soul. Meg shook his head and sighed. He got off too easy. It's not that cheap. He was a proud and arrogant fellow who set the world as his goal. In the end, he had his soul devoured. I think he must have been in great despair before he died, Irina said with a smile. She had no sympathy for the guy who had almost killed Meg and Amy and forced their family into a desperate situation. This favor was given to Vanessa, and that girl is very sensible. She gave me a lot. Meg looked at Irina with a smile. "What do you want to eat for breakfast?" "I want to eat you." Irina stared at him and said with her chin raised. Meg raised his hand to look at his watch and shook his head. "There's not enough time. Sometimes it was a difficult thing to endure for too long. Then I'll have a bowl of shaved noodles." Irina leaned lazily against the back of the chair and looked at Meg, who had turned to go into the kitchen. She said, "What identity do you think I should use to enter Amy's? I saw the way those girls look at you. They can't wait to eat you alive. If you beckon them with your finger, I'm afraid they'll wash themselves clean and send themselves to your door. This is not good. I think it's time to change it. I think it's pretty good. Who wouldn't be happy about being liked?" Mag righteously said, "I'm Boss Mag, who's always calm and collected. Not just anyone can seduce me." "Is that so?" Irina's lips curled up. "I think your previous beast-ear girl was not bad. I don't like that anymore. She's too obedient. She doesn't look like a lady boss." Irina shook her head. "Then why don't we do a scene where Amy cleaves the mountain to save her mother?" Meg asked again. Irina was a little interested. She sat up slightly and said, "What's that?" "You'll act as a monkey trapped under the Five Fingers Mountain." "Oh no, I mean an elf. You'll be forced to be separated from us. After Amy learns magic, she'll go to the sealed land alone and cleave the mountain to save her mother. It'll be a good story. What about you?" "Me? I'm just a freeloader. I'll just focus on my job." "Well, it sounds good. But where's the Five Fingers Mountain?" "How about Mount Hua?" "Where's Mount Hua?" "What kind of mountain is there in the Wind Forest?" "The Wind Forest is a plain with only a few slopes. It doesn't deserve to be called a mountain." Chapter 2244. After some serious discussion, Meg and Irina still couldn't come to a consensus on her new identity, so they could only give up for now. Meg was actually looking forward to her appearing as Mamie's lady boss. After all, their interactions now were more or less sneaky. Making an official appearance as the mother of 2 children should be something she yearned for. Actually, even if you announce your identity directly, no one would dare to do anything to you now, right? Irina said vaguely as she ate her noodles. Meg was stunned. With his current power and reputation, that was indeed the case. A demigod was already in invincible existence on the Norland continent, and he had played an important role twice in the war against the devils. He had already become the savior in many people's hearts, and was no longer just the unparalleled god of war of the Roth Empire. Even if he were to announce his identity now, no one would dare to come looking for death. Josh was dead, Sean's arm was broken, and the Wind Forest was completely destroyed. Who else was there? Without waiting for Meg to answer, Irina muttered to herself. But if that's the case, it seems like it will become very boring. Those customers will no longer come purely for the food and cook for a group of people with ulterior motives. Boring. Yes, boring. This was also one of the reasons why Meg didn't want to announce his identity. There was another deeper reason. Perhaps it was that little bit of persistence in his heart. The boss of Mamie's, Meg, might be the real him, and also the identity he liked and accepted wholeheartedly. And the savior, Alex, was more like another character that Spider-Man put on a mask to play. He could just appear when needed. He couldn't imagine how his originally interesting life would be torn apart if he were to announce his identity. A large number of customers might be replaced. The patience of those people with ulterior motives wasn't something that could be compared to those who purely ate. The ladies in the restaurant might also feel uncomfortable when interacting with him and become restrained and unnatural. Meg felt terrible just by thinking about it. Irina picked up the bowl and drank the noodle soup. Then she looked at Meg and said, "Oh, yes. Isn't your Miss Black Cat printed? Are you planning to sell it in the restaurant too?" "No, Miss Black Cat is planning to use it to advertise for team leader Vicky. If it sells well in Chaos City, it won't bring her much profit, so I'm planning to send these 10,000 copies to Rodu and get Effie to help me sell them." Meg poured a cup of warm water for her. Irina took a sip of water and looked at him with a smile. "You look more like a shrewd businessman now. It's money. It's not shabby at all." Meg smiled. He looked at her and said, "Only when one is in charge will one know that firewood and rice are expensive. Money is a good thing. You should understand this very well. 40,000 elves. One mouthful of rice per person. That's not a small number." Irina nodded in agreement. After all, this was not the Wind Forest. The elves could not be self-sufficient and had to spend money to buy everything. If it weren't for the fact that Meg immediately got a few big projects for the Night Elves when they came to Chaos City, and they were all very profitable projects, she would have to worry about the Night Elves' meals every day. "Then I'll get them to arrange for people to send these picture books to the Titan Tavern today. That's good too. I'll write a letter to Effie later and ask her to help me sell the picture books." Meg nodded. That would save him a trip. Apart from asking her to sell the picture books, Meg also gave Effie a gift: rum agency. Hannah's distillery had officially entered the era of mass production. Apart from supplying Amy's, they also had a very sufficient supply. Meg's plan was to set up 3 rum outlets in Chaos City and expand outside at the same time. Rodu, which was popular with alcohol culture and had a huge consumption potential, was naturally one of his targets for expansion. Effie was a good business partner, so he intended to give this opportunity to her. Apart from Titan Tavern, there was no other alcohol that could support the Titan Tavern's reputation. If they could get rum as a supplement, they would naturally be more competitive. It was a business, so it was only right for them to take care of each other. After the morning operating hours, Meg went to Hope School. It only took a few months for the new school to be built from the ground up in the northern part of the city. The craftsmen were removing the outer fences. There were rows upon rows of 4-story teaching buildings. There was a training field, a magic hall, a vocational building, everything that one could think of. Meg stood at the school's entrance with a slight smirk. He seemed to have already seen the children carrying their school bags and entering the new school. He was involved in the whole process of this school, from the acquisition of funds to the location and design of the blueprints. Although he didn't come often, he could be said to have watched it being built bit by bit. The establishment of Hope School was to give those children who dropped out of school due to poverty a chance to receive an education, and to give them a chance to change their fate through learning. He always believed that learning was the most effective way for most people to change their fate and social class. The theory that learning was useful was still applicable even in a different world. Because he had seen Amy's group of friends, he was even more enthusiastic about promoting this matter and gave a lot of support. The finishing work of the school was almost done, and it looked like it wouldn't be a problem to start school in a week. "Mr. Meg?" A voice came from behind him. Meg turned around and smiled at the person who came. "Teacher Luna, what a coincidence. The new teachers have a trial class today, so I came to take a look and also hand over the construction team." Luna stood in front of Meg and smiled at him. "This is your first time coming here after the school was built, right? Do you want me to show you around?" "If Teacher Luna isn't busy, of course. I'd be honored." Meg smiled and nodded. He originally wanted to see the school's construction, so it was naturally better to have Luna show him around. "This way, please." Luna led Meg through the school gate. As the principal of Hope School, every blade of grass and every tree here was her painstaking effort. Listening to Luna explain the situation of Hope School in detail, Meg nodded from time to time and asked questions occasionally, looking at her with more admiration. He originally thought that as long as the money was in place, everything would be easy. But to actually build a school, establish a teaching team, and enroll students in assigned classes was actually such a tedious and difficult task. Luna was a weak woman, but she shouldered all of this alone. In order to build a school for the children that could change their fate, she had sacrificed too much. Luna stood in front of a teaching building and looked at Meg with a smile. Although I've thanked you many times, I still want to thank you on behalf of the children. You're welcome. Meg shook his head and looked at the vocational building in the distance. He smiled and said, "Is your school hiring chef teachers? The kind that doesn't cost money?" Chapter 2245. Luna was stunned. She looked at Meg in a daze. "I just heard you say that the school has set up all kinds of vocational training so that the children can master a skill before they enter society. I thought that being a chef is also a profession, so I just asked casually." Meg smiled. "Of course, if you don't have such plans for now, just pretend I didn't say anything." "Of course," Luna blurted out. Then she embarrassedly said, "But Mr. Meg is so busy. Would it be too much trouble for you to come to the school for lessons?" Mr. Meg's culinary skills were beyond doubt. He was the best chef in Chaos City or even the Northern Continent. If there was such an excellent chef teaching the children, it would definitely be a great benefit for those children who wanted to be a chef but didn't have the chance. Ding! Host has triggered a side mission. Good teacher. Host, please become a specially hired teacher of Hope School and recruit 30 students for each class. Mission reward. It depends on the host's mission completion rate. The better the culinary skills of the students, the better the reward. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. Meg's eyes lit up. This is interesting. It's all right. Other than the operating hours, I still have time to come for 2 or 3 lessons a week. Meg smiled. "I just don't know if I'm suitable to be a teacher since I've never taught children before. You're a very outstanding and easygoing person. Of course, there's no problem for you to be a teacher." Luna nodded. "Also, for the vocational curriculum, our initial arrangement is 3 lessons a week. We can arrange the lessons according to your schedule, Mr. Meg." "All right." Meg nodded. After thinking for a while, he asked, "Do I need to take the teacher's entrance exam?" "You're a specially hired teacher with professional skills. Everyone knows about your professionalism. But, according to the rules, you have to take a simple test. We need to understand you well and determine if you need to go through some pre-job training," Luna said. Meg nodded. He didn't find it troublesome. Instead, he felt that Luna was very professional. She didn't make him take up the post just because they were close. "What's the test about? When will you participate?" Meg asked. Professional skills teachers test professional skills and teaching ability. In the chef profession, you can think of it as the process of teaching a student how to cook a dish. It just so happens that there are teachers taking part in the test today. "Do you have any other arrangements in the morning?" "The test will take about an hour," Gina said. Meg nodded thoughtfully and said, "Then let's do the test this morning." He was also a professional when it came to teaching people how to cook. This Goldfinger wasn't given to him for nothing. "All right, please follow me." Luna led Meg to the training field. The tests for the teachers of the professions were carried out in these 3 days. Weaponsmiths, healers, pharmacists, professionals from all walks of life were being tested in separate practice fields. Even though Hope School was more of a charity school, Luna listened to Mag's suggestion in terms of salary in order to recruit talents and offered a very attractive offer. Those who were able to participate in the test today had all passed the written test. There were quite a number of them. Meg listened to Luna's introduction and nodded slightly. Although time was tight, everything in the school was carried out in an orderly manner. Luna's ability was evident. "Principal." A young female teacher stood up in surprise when she saw Luna. Then, she sized up Meg, who was beside her. Young, handsome, and steady. Luna stopped that teacher and said, "Hilla, this is Mr. Meg. He plans to apply for a job as a teacher. I brought him here to take part in the test. Please arrange for it to be carried out as soon as possible." Mr. Meg. Hilla felt that the name was familiar. She picked up the name list on the table and scanned it twice. She looked up and said, "But this name isn't on the test list?" Meg looked at her, and the corner of his mouth twitched. It seemed that this person had not eaten at Mamie's yet. But thinking about it, he was not a big star. He was just a restaurant owner with a little fame. He could not just go anywhere and announce his name and shock everyone. Of course, if he changed his name to Alex, the effect will be different. Hilla looked at Luna with mixed feelings. Could it be that the principal wanted to use her connections to add another person? One had to know that those who participated in the test today had all passed the written test before they got the chance to take the test. Luna's great image in her heart began to waver. This Mr. Meg is specially invited by me. According to the rules, he can take the test directly. You can add his name at the end of the list. He is applying for a job as a chef teacher, Luna explained. Oh, okay. Hilla sat down and wrote Meg's name at the end of the list. But she still felt a little uneasy. "Oh yes, Principal, there are no candidates taking the test today, so we did not prepare any kitchenware. If this gentleman wants to take the test, I'm afraid he will have to wait for us to prepare first." Hilla put down her pen and looked at Luna. Luna looked troubled when she heard this. She had forgotten to consider this. "It's okay. I have spare kitchenware. You should have a staff cafeteria here, right? I need you to prepare a few ingredients for me," Meg said. Luna looked at Hilla and said, "Then let's arrange it this way. In next round, let Mr. Meg take the test first. Can I borrow a pen and paper?" Meg looked at Hilla and said. Hilla opened a book and passed the pen and paper to Meg. Meg took the pen and wrote down the names of a few ingredients. One purple eggplant. Hilla looked at the strong and powerful words and was a little surprised. This gentleman looked handsome and elegant. He had a good temperament and could write so well. He was actually a chef. No matter how she looked at him, he looked more like a calligraphy master. His handwriting was so good that it was much better than the handwriting of those who had just come to apply for the calligraphy teacher position. However, he was actually here to cook. Moreover, he had a good temperament. His side profile was perfect, his nose was high, his eyes were deep, and his clothes were decent. He was simply a super high-quality young man, Hilla, Luna reminded her. Hilla came back to her senses and quickly looked away from Meg's face. Her face was flushed red as she picked up the book and said, "I'll arrange it now." After saying that, she ran out of the door as if she was escaping. Hilla is a new teacher, but she's a very patient and motivated girl. Luna looked at Hilla's back and smiled. She is very motivated. Meg nodded and followed Luna to the test venue. Chapter 2246. The establishment of the vocational skills course was to allow children from poor families to learn a skill in school and gain a foothold in society. However, it was not easy to recruit teachers in this field. They had to have a popular occupation and be suitable for teaching in school. The test this morning went on for more than an hour. The teachers who acted as judges looked a little serious. A white-haired old teacher nodded at the middle-aged man who had finished his jewelry appreciation demonstration on the stage and said, "Thank you for your teaching. 3 days later, we will post the list of candidates at the school gate." The middle-aged man put away his small wooden box, nodded at the crowd, and turned to leave the testing room. This person's professionalism is not bad, but his teaching ability needs to be improved. The content was too obscure and difficult to understand. Even people like me who know about jewelry found it difficult to understand. I'm afraid the children will find it even harder to accept. A young and beautiful female teacher sighed, the emerald in her hand shining brightly. Yes, many of the teachers who came for the trial this morning have this problem. There is no problem with their professionalism. Those who can pass the test are all senior practitioners in their respective businesses. However, there is a huge difference between their professional work and teaching. Even if they have prepared, their performance is very average. Many of them can't even reach the goal of teaching. The old teacher also sighed. The other judges also had similar worried expressions. It was likely that the situation in the other testing rooms was similar. There was a lack of quality teachers, and this was only because Hope Primary School had offered a very good salary that it could attract so many outstanding talents to come. It was also because of such a good salary that they wanted to choose better teachers for the children so that they could learn useful knowledge and skills in the limited teaching time. Knock, knock. There was a knock on the door. The old teacher picked up the list and looked at it, saying, "Next is a makeup artist. This is a new profession in recent years. The market prospects are good. It is gradually being valued in banquets, performances, and other settings." The door was pushed open and Luna came in. "Principal." The judges were a little surprised. "Teachers, thank you for your hard work." Luna nodded slightly and introduced the crowd. "This is Mr. Meg, who I specially invited. He's a chef. Because he's tight on time, I brought him here to take the test first." Hearing this, everyone's eyes fell on Meg, who had followed Luna in. Meg, who was wearing a long gray windbreaker, had a tall figure. He wore a pair of black leather boots under his black suit pants. He was handsome, and his facial features were upright. There was a slight smile at the corner of his mouth, and he looked quite amiable. Other than his handsomeness, he did seem to fit the disposition of a teacher. The eyes of the two ladies present lit up slightly. Among the people who came to take the test this morning, there was no doubt that this person's appearance and figure ranked first. It wasn't that he had other intentions. He just wanted to make his eyes more comfortable so that he could work more efficiently. "Mr. Meg? Why does this name sound so familiar?" The teacher wearing the emerald frowned as he searched his memory. Mary had just returned from Rodu recently. Previously, she had been in charge of the family's affairs in Rodu, but because she was tired of the internal strife in the family, she handed over all the affairs to the other members of the family last month and returned to Rodu. It just so happened that Hope School was recruiting teachers. After hearing about teacher Luna's story, she went into seclusion at home to study for a month. She successfully passed the written examination and interview and became the new teacher of Chaos School. Because there was a shortage of staff, she, as a new teacher, was also pulled in as a judge. "Chef, principal, when we were discussing this, we didn't set up a chef major, right?" The old teacher, Elton, asked Luna. The other four teachers were also looking at Luna. Although the principal had the right to invite talents, the establishment of a chef training class was indeed not part of their plan. Furthermore, they had discussed this profession before. In order to become an outstanding chef, the students had to have a good teacher and undergo a lot of practice. Regardless of whether it was the student's schedule, the venue, or the consumption of various ingredients, they were all things that Hope School couldn't provide very well at the moment. For example, professions such as jewelry appreciation and sales had very low requirements for the venue. They were more suitable for the current Chaos School. Luna knew what all of the teachers were thinking. In the past, she had indeed not planned to set up a chef major. However, this was a suggestion from Mr. Meg. As someone who had tasted Mr. Meg's cooking many times, she knew that if the children could learn from him, even if they only learned one or two of his signature dishes, they would be able to live comfortably. In fact, they might even become the target of all restaurants. This was a true master chef, and he was willing to teach the children for free. She had no doubt that Meg would teach the children with the most sincere attitude. However, according to the rules of the test, the judges were randomly assigned, and the details of the testers were not to be revealed during the test. She could only say, being a chef is a profession with a lot of job prospects. After you complete your studies, you'll be able to find a job regardless of whether you are running a restaurant on your own or joining a restaurant's kitchen. After careful consideration, I've decided to set up a chef major and hire professional chefs to teach and train the children. This was ridiculous. Olton's brows furrowed, but he repressed the urge to say anything. He was a retired teacher, and it was Luna who had personally invited him here. He was very attached to Hope School, but there were so many teachers present, so he couldn't turn down Luna. All of the other teachers also didn't say anything. Hope School had been established by Luna, and she was the principal, so she had the right to make all of the decisions. However, everyone was still rather perplexed by her decision to set up a chef major right before the start of the school term. Could it be because of this man? But he was dressed so elegantly, and his aura was that of a nobleman's. Was he really a chef? Olton turned to Meg, and said, "That being said, we didn't prepare any of the items required for the chef's test today. We don't even have basic cooking utensils. Are you planning to perform without any actual food?" Meg could already sense some doubts and dissatisfaction from the teacher's expressions and words. It seemed that his sudden request had caused some trouble for Luna. "I apologize for my abrupt visit, but I've brought my cooking utensils, and I've already asked teacher Hilla to help me find the ingredients I need in the cafeteria. They should be here soon," Meg said with a smile as he pulled out a set of cooking utensils from a storage box. Chapter 22:47. All of the teachers wore peculiar expressions as they looked at the testing room that was suddenly filled with all kinds of kitchenware. They weren't too surprised that Meg had a storage device. Although it was precious, it was still something that could be easily obtained as long as one had enough money. However, to come to the testing room with such a complete set of kitchenware, they were all stunned speechless. Maylie looked at Meg with her beautiful eyes, and an intrigued smile appeared on her face. This man was quite interesting. She wanted to see how he was going to conduct a cooking lesson in his proper attire. "Here are the things you wanted, but I didn't find any chili or garlic," Hilla said to Meg as she walked in with a basket. Meg accepted the basket and smiled at Hilla. "Thank you. I brought these two ingredients myself." Hilla looked at Meg's warm smile and blushed slightly. She nodded and said, It's all right. It's just a small matter." After saying that, she bid farewell to Luna and all of the teachers and quickly left, closing the door behind her. Luna walked to the judge's table and sat down. Meg took out the chili and garlic from the storage device and said to Eldon, "I'm ready. We can begin the test." "Are you sure you're ready?" Eldon asked as he looked at Meg, who was wearing a trench coat. "Yes." Meg nodded. "Then let's begin." Eldon nodded. Things had already progressed to this stage, so it would be unreasonable for him to try and stop him. He wanted to see what kind of skills this man had that could make Luna change her mind. He wanted to see if the Hope School really wanted to add a cooking major to him. "Everyone, as a chef, the first lesson I'm going to teach you is to dress appropriately. People who dress like me don't deserve to be in the kitchen." Meg switched to teacher mode in a second. He took off his windbreaker and placed it on the table beside him. He unbuttoned his suit one by one and placed it on the table as well. Only a white shirt was left. The well-tailored shirt revealed the outline of his 8-pack abs. A chef's battlefield is in the kitchen. Our weapons are kitchen knives and spoons, and a decent chef's uniform is our battle robe. Obviously, my uniform is not up to standard. However, due to the limited conditions today, I can't change my clothes. But we have to be as careful as possible. Meg carefully rolled up the sleeves of his shirt, then put on the apron and the chef's hat. Cleanliness is the most important thing when serving food to guests. Therefore, we have to eliminate any contamination that we might bring to the food, such as the dirt on our hair and clothes. Meg poured a basin of water and said while washing, after changing into the chef's uniform, "The first step is to wash your hands. A pair of clean hands is the most basic requirement of a chef." Meg's voice was gentle and magnetic. The content of his speech was vivid and interesting. His movements were naturally not stiff, and the judges were unconsciously immersed in his speech. Luna nodded repeatedly as she listened. Previously, she was a little worried that Meg would not adapt to teaching and might need her to train him. But now it seemed that this idea was completely unnecessary. Mr. Meg was simply a natural teacher. That action of taking off his clothes is so cool. Mary's focus was a little different. Although she was trying her best to listen to Mag's lecture, her gaze couldn't help but wander toward his handsome face and 8-pack waist unconsciously. The dish we're learning today is eggplant with garlic sauce. Although there is fish in the name of this dish, in fact, this dish does not use fish as an ingredient. Therefore, to make this eggplant worthy of its name, we have to work hard on the side dishes. We used eggplant with garlic sauce. Like thunder in her mind, Mary suddenly figured out why Meg's name sounded so familiar. Wasn't this the Mr. Meg from the magazine she had read on the way back? The owner of Mamie's, the one who had won the best chef at the birthday banquet of the Roth Empire's king. That eggplant with garlic sauce course had left a deep impression on her. Of course, as a young mistress who had never done any household chores, she naturally had not tried it. She simply thought that it was delicious just by looking at the course. After returning, first there was a quarrel in her family, and then she was busy preparing for the exam in seclusion. She did not have time to go to Mamie's for a meal. Who would have thought that the famous Mr. Meg would look like this? Young, handsome, good-looking, and has a good figure. It's simply amazing. No wonder Principal Luna suddenly changed her mind. It was no problem to add a major for such a master. The principal even brought him to participate in the exam according to the rules, and did not reveal his identity to reduce the impact on the other teachers. With that in mind, she was embarrassed by her immature thoughts, and a sense of respect for Luna welled up in her heart. The other 4 teachers did not know about Meg's identity, but they were all nodding and jotting down notes from time to time at the sight of Meg's profound teachings. Even Olton's stern expression had changed, and he was looking at Meg with emotion in his eyes. The number of times he nodded was no less than that of the other teachers. After the oil was heated, the spices were added into the pot. Meg held the handle of the pot in one hand and a metal ladle in the other, and the aroma of the spices wafted into the air in all directions. It smells so good. The 5 judges' eyes lit up. He was only frying the spices, but the aroma was already so alluring. Meanwhile, the aroma wafted through the air, causing a small commotion in the test rooms, which were only temporarily separated by boards. Is it time to eat? That can't be. How long has it been since breakfast? Teachers, are we continuing the exam? Continue. Don't stop. The corners of Meg's mouth curled up slightly as he listened to the voices coming from all directions. He ignored them and poured the processed eggplant into the pot. He had made some simple modifications to the eggplant with garlic sauce, and the most practical one was the recipe he had written in the column in Whole Foods last month. This was also the reason why he dared to take the exam directly today. He had already prepared his lessons a month in advance. Not long after, Meg turned off the heat and took the pot out. A bright red, fragrant eggplant with garlic sauce appeared before everyone's eyes. This is the finished eggplant with garlic sauce. Isn't it simple? Meg held the plate with one hand and showed it to the judges with a smile. I'm a failure. A failure. Mary nodded. She was only greedy for the eggplant in his hand. Olton stood up and applauded. He looked at Meg with admiration and said, Young man, I can see that you are a rare teaching prodigy. Join our Hope School. The other teachers also nodded with smiles and looked at Meg with admiration. They didn't expect to listen to a cooking lesson so seriously. Moreover, they were so engrossed in it that they took notes. They felt as if they had really learned how to make the eggplant with garlic sauce. I agree, but before that, can I try the eggplant with garlic sauce first? Mary said as she stared at the eggplant with garlic sauce in Meg's hand. I think it's fine. The female teacher beside her also smiled. Chapter 2248. A few of the judges had lunch in advance and then gave out the highest grade of evaluation one after another. Mary ate the last mouthful of rice in her bowl with a piece of eggplant and put down the bowl, still feeling a little unsatisfied. There was too little eggplant with garlic sauce, and it was too delicious, so it was finished in a few chopsticks. However, this was still the most delicious dish she had eaten since returning to Chaos City. Sour, spicy, sweet, and salty. The small piece of eggplant contained intoxicating flavors, rich and long, and lingered in the air. Of course, what was even more amazing was that this eggplant with garlic sauce was cooked right in front of them, and it still maintained an astonishing degree of completion and deliciousness. Olton stood up and looked at Meg with a joyful expression and said, Mr. Meg, we're colleagues from now on. This morning, this was the vocational training teacher he was most satisfied with. There was no other teacher. Outstanding professional skills, simple teaching methods, immersive teaching rhythm. He even suspected that Meg had been a teacher before. Thank you. Meg nodded with a smile. He was also very satisfied with his test. After all, he had taught Phyrus, Anna, and Mara how to cook, so he had some experience in this area, and the results were quite good. After the test, Meg didn't stay for long. He put away the kitchen utensils and cookware and bade farewell to the judges and left with his clothes. Meg went to the washroom and happened to run into Mary when he went out to wash his hands. "Hi, Mr. Meg, I'm Mary. Your cooking is really good." Mary looked at him with a smile and greeted him. "You're too kind, Teacher Mary." Meg shook his head humbly and took a look at this teacher with short brown hair. Her eyebrows were delicate, and her light brown eyes were bright and intelligent. "Your restaurant is called Mamie's, right?" Mary asked. You know, Meg was a little surprised. With his photographic memory, he was sure that this teacher had never been to his restaurant. "I've seen your column in a magazine. I didn't remember it just now, but the eggplant with garlic sauce left a deep impression on me, so I remembered it again." Maylee smiled. "You can come to the restaurant for a meal when you have time. Goodbye, Teacher Maylee." Meg washed his hands and turned to leave with a smile. Luna was waiting for him outside. The two of them chatted as they left. Mary looked at the backs of the two people and revealed a thoughtful expression. "The headmaster and Mr. Meg look like a perfect match," Hilla muttered softly. "Is the principal on good terms with him?" Maylee asked curiously. Hilla looked at Meg and said, "When I went to the cafeteria to get the food, I met an uncle. He said that Mr. Meg is an important investor of Hope School. Without him, there might not be Hope School." "I just talked with several judges, and they all agree that you are qualified to be a chef teacher." Luna walked beside Meg and said with a smile, "Am I accepted in advance?" Meg asked with a smile. "It's our honor to have such an outstanding chef like you as a teacher at Hope School," Luna said seriously. She watched Meg's test from the side. She was shocked by Meg's ability to control the situation. She was even more touched that he selflessly presented such a precious recipe like the eggplant with garlic sauce. She knew about the Mamie's craze in Chaos City's culinary world recently. Various restaurants were releasing the same delicacies as Mamie's. Although the taste was mostly passable, they were trying to ride on the popularity. If the children could learn a few of Meg's signature dishes from him, they could easily get a good job in various restaurants. Meg stopped in his tracks and asked her, "We didn't intend to set up a chef's major, right?" "Yes." Luna didn't hide it from him. "I will contact the construction team today. We will build a chef's practical training ground as soon as possible." Meg shook his head with a smile and said, "I was the one who suggested this major. Leave the design and construction of the practical training ground to me. I saw an empty plot of land next to the cafeteria. Can I use it?" "This?" Luna hesitated. "Actually, my idea is to set up a chef's academy. The scale may be small in the beginning, but the goal is to become the best training ground for chefs on the Northern continent. It will become the holy land in the hearts of chefs." Meg smiled. "So, I want to make the practical training ground look more professional. I'm afraid no one else can do this." Luna looked at Meg with a smile on her face. She nodded and said, "All right, I'll leave the plot of land next to the cafeteria to you." "Thank you." Meg nodded. He walked around the school with Luna before leaving. Standing at the school gate, Meg looked back at the new teaching building with a smile on his face. Who would have thought that he would also become a glorious teacher? Even though it was just a part-time job, he still felt that it was a little amazing. Meg went to the textile factory on the way and booked a batch of outstanding night elf craftsmen from Ashley. There were still 6 days before Hope School started. He had to build the chef's practical training ground before school started so that it wouldn't affect the school's start. During lunch, Irina looked at Meg in surprise and asked, "You're going to be a teacher at Hope School?" The girls stopped what they were doing and looked at Meg. "Father, are you going to be a teacher?" Amy even jumped up from her chair in surprise. In her heart, teachers were super awesome. For example, Teacher Luna. "Boss, what are you teaching?" Mia asked curiously. "How do I make all the beautiful girls in the city fall in love with me?" Angela rested her chin on her hand. "This answer is a little close." Meg pointed at Angela. "Go to the new Oriental Chef Academy. You're going to teach the children how to cook?" Phyllis understood immediately. "Yes, Hope School has set up vocational training courses. When I went to visit the school today, I happened to meet Teacher Luna, so I applied to be a part-time teacher. I've already passed the test." Meg nodded with a smile. "Teacher Meg," Anna called out crisply. Good girl, little Anna. Meg nodded with a smile. The little girl was indeed one of his students. Won't it affect the children's studies? Irina asked. Meg shook his head slightly and said, learning is actually a means. It's not just about knowledge, magic, and martial arts. For those children who come from poor families, it's more practical to have something that can allow them to have a foothold in society and break away from their parents' poverty and inability to break free from the mire. Chapter 2249. The construction of Hope School had always been under everyone's attention. After all, Meg was an important investor, and Amy was very concerned about it. Therefore, everyone had a lot of feelings for Hope School. When they heard that the school had been completed and was about to open, and that Meg had become a part-time teacher, they became even more interested. Then, can I also be a part-time magic teacher? My spatial magic is pretty good, Barbara asked Meg as she put down the meat skewer in her hand. Her eagerness to be a teacher was burning. Meg stared at her for a while and nodded. I see that you have the demeanor of a teacher. Barbara's face lit up. She couldn't help but straighten her flat chest. What about me? I can teach the children how to sing, Gina said as she raised her hand. She loved children the most. It would be great if she could be a teacher. That's really possible. Meg nodded. Gina had already mastered the common language. Although she still had a slight accent, her pronunciation was perfect and it didn't affect her singing at all. Moreover, her singing was indeed very good. After all, she had the voice of a mermaid that had been kissed by an angel. She was more than qualified to be a music teacher. Boss, I can be your assistant when you go to class, Raina also said with a smile. That's not a bad idea. Meg nodded. He didn't have much experience in dealing with dozens of children alone. It would be better to have an assistant. Everyone chimed in one after another, showing their great enthusiasm for going to Hope Academy to be a glorious teacher. Meg clearly rejected Angela's suggestion to teach the children how to develop their charm. Then, he looked at everyone and said, I don't have the final say on this. If you really want to be a part-time teacher in Hope School, I'll bring you there one day. Teacher Luna will have to say it. During the afternoon break, Meg worked on a design plan for the Practical Training Center alone in the study. Although it was called a Practical Training Center, it could actually be called a comprehensive teaching building. Meg's idea was to build a 4-story teaching building. The first floor would be a super large kitchen that could accommodate 100 people to learn and practice cooking at the same time, as well as a food storage room. The second floor was a comprehensive teaching hall, which was divided into many classrooms. Later on, it could be divided into many cuisines for teaching. The third floor was temporarily designated as the recipe pavilion. It was used to store all kinds of recipes. Only the strong, or rather, good scholars were qualified to obtain the corresponding recipes. As for the fourth floor, it was the teacher's office. Meg completed the design with the help of the system, then ran to the north of the city and quickly arranged for the construction team of the night elves to enter the site. The teachers looked at the empty space next to the cafeteria that was surrounded by construction workers and started to discuss in surprise. After all, they had just received the notice yesterday that the construction of the school had been completed. Why would there be a new construction team coming in today? Furthermore, all of them were elven craftsmen. The construction will take 5 days. We'll remove all the surrounding materials by the night before school starts. It won't affect the start of school, Meg promised in Luna's office. Isn't it too rushed? Luna asked. It's all right. They're professionals. We've already reserved time. Meg waved his hand with a smile. He was very confident in this construction team of the Night Elves. The construction team entered the site and completed the handover. Meg then had a meeting with a few elven engineers to confirm the final plan and some design details. After the materials were brought in, they started right away. It was a 4-story building. Time was tight, and Meg had a lot of requests, so they had to work in 3 shifts overnight. System, I'm going to customize the kitchenware. Are you going to do this business? Meg asked in his heart as he pushed his bicycle out of the school gate. As a god of cookery cultivation system, this system only nurtures god of cookery. It doesn't do business, the system said proudly. That's a pity. There are more than 100 sets of kitchenware and furniture. Seems like I have to make a trip down. Luckily, you can buy anything in Chaos City, Meg said unhurriedly as he rode to the blacksmith shop not far away. Host, why don't we discuss it again? Discuss? What's there to discuss? I'm very glad that you're so principled. After all, there aren't many systems with such principles nowadays. I have to cherish them. Meg parked the bicycle in front of the blacksmith shop, put down the footrest, and walked in. As a god of cookery cultivation system, I'm a professional in making kitchenware. The system said seriously. Boss, how much does it cost to customize a set of kitchenware here? Meg asked the dwarf blacksmith who was leaning against the stove. The blacksmith put down the little pornographic book in his hand and stuffed it under his, but as he looked up at Meg and said, "That depends on what set meal you want." "What set meal do you have?" Meg asked with a smile. The blacksmith counted with his fingers and said, "Set meal 1. 3-piece pot set plus 3-piece kitchen knife, set plus stove, *1, 800 copper coins. Set meal 2. 5-piece pot set plus 5-piece kitchen knife, set plus stove, *1. Magic energy stove, *1, 2,800 copper coins. Set meal 3. 8-piece pot set plus 12-piece kitchen knife, set plus stove, *1. Magic energy stove, *1, cutting and washing table, *1, 5,888 copper coins. What's so special about the things in this set meal?" Meg asked again. "Customer, this way, please." The blacksmith got up and didn't forget to put the book in his arms. He then led Meg to the display rack at the side. On the display rack were various pots and knives of different styles, such as bone chopping knives, kitchen knives, bloodletting knives. It was very professional and complete. All kinds of pots and utensils were enough for ordinary restaurant chefs to use in various situations. Meg checked the goods. The quality was ordinary, but it was enough to be used as teaching utensils. 100 sets, that's 588,800 copper coins. It doesn't seem expensive. Meg thought in his heart. Expensive? This is simply too expensive. They actually dared to call out such a high price for such lousy pots and knives? This is simply a black-hearted merchant. This bone-chopping knife, don't talk about magical beasts. Even the bones of ordinary wild boars can't be chopped. And that pot, the thickness of the bottom of the pot, is uneven. This kind of pot can't be used evenly and can't be used to make a perfect dish. Host, as a teacher, you let your students use kitchen utensils of such quality? This is poisoning the flowers of the motherland and wasting their youth. The system said emotionally. Is that so? I think it's quite good. The main thing is that the price is more appropriate. Meg said with a calm face. 58.88, I don't want you. Only 56.88, a more perfect, luxurious set meal to take home. The system threw out the configuration list of the luxurious set meal. 3 knives, 3 pots, 2 magic energy stoves, and a set of kitchen stoves and cutting tables. It seemed that the configuration was not as good as the set meal 3 provided by the blacksmith, but it made the corner of Meg's mouth curl up. He actually didn't like fancy things. Whether it was knives or pots, enough was enough. It didn't mean more was better. Isn't this set meal 1? Then I can only give you 888. Meg said. Chapter 2250. In the end, Meg completed the purchase task at the price of 889. It smells good. I want this paring knife. Meg gave the dwarf blacksmith a silver coin, took the shiny silver paring knife, and walked out of the blacksmith shop in a good mood, humming a tune. I thought it was a big customer, the blacksmith muttered, put the silver coin in his pocket, took out the book again, and leaned against the stove to read. Meg didn't intend to order from the blacksmith from the beginning. The craftsmanship was a bit rough and not as good as Mabai and Lulu, not to mention compared to the system. The set meal provided by the system was enough for a professional chef, let alone just for teaching. As for teaching aids, such as tables and chairs, they were also purchased from the system. Now, he just had to wait for the teaching building to be built, put all these things in, and wait for the arrival of the students. Meg was in a good mood, so he returned to the restaurant, looked at the small blackboard hanging at the door, and went in with the board. After a while, He came out with the board again. On it was written, "Today's new item, spicy field snail." The weather was cold, and the number of customers drinking beer had decreased. Rum had become a good substitute. However, there were few dishes in the restaurant that went with alcohol, and this spicy field snail was launched for that. It was a professional dish that went with alcohol. Meg returned to the restaurant and looked at Anne, who was sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, drawing. He walked forward with a smile and looked at the drawing board in front of her from the side. The painting was very simple. There was a blue sky and white clouds in a corner of the Aiden Square. There wasn't much technique mixed in, and it made people feel relaxed. There wasn't even a clear main body. It was just sitting there and looking at the things in sight. However, Meg felt that the painting looked very comfortable, as if the scenery was included in the painting, and added the last stroke, put down the pen, and turned to look at Meg with a smile on her face. "It's very beautiful," Meg praised with a smile, and picked up a picture book from the table beside her and handed it to Meg, saying in sign language, "A new picture book." Meg took the picture book. There was an orange swan on the picture. The name of the book was The Ugly Duckling. Meg opened the picture book with mixed feelings. After a while, Meg looked at the grill on the bonfire at the end of the page and the golden roast goose dripping with oil. His throat rolled as he couldn't hold back his laughter. This was probably a modified version of Ugly Duckling dictated by Amy. It was too tragic. However, this story actually had a moral. Did you think that life had deceived you? Actually, that was not the case. Life was already destined. No matter how hard Ugly Duckling tried, it could only become a roast goose. Oh, right. In fact, the ending of the story did not turn into roast goose. Ugly Duckling escaped with its life, and the duck that had bullied it since it was young became a roasted duck and an orange swan. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, which was napping on the counter, and wondered how it would feel after reading this story. "It's quite good." Meg nodded. If he put aside his preconceived ideas, the story of this version of Ugly Duckling was actually more twisted and fantastical. It was quite interesting. After all, he didn't understand at first how a four-legged beast that hatched from an egg could become an orange swan that could fly in the sky. With the addition of the two little fellows' magical imagination, the story became more childlike and interesting. The story of a little orange cat working hard to grow up, defeating a bad duck, and pursuing its dream of flying was even more inspirational. Is it because it can't be printed? And looked at Meg with a slightly disappointed expression. Meg smiled and said, "No, let's try to print 5,000 copies later after the mermaid picture books are sold out." Anne's eyes lit up, and she nodded with a smile. Meg sat down opposite her and took the picture book that he had roughly flipped through just now and looked at it again. Anne's drawing skills were still improving. Although it wasn't obvious compared to Miss Blackcat's picture book, the details were more vivid and natural. The main characters of this story were Ugly Duckling and various small animals. It was much simpler than Miss Blackcat's complicated characters and costumes, but the outstanding details made the picture book more readable. It was easy to be touched by the various cuteness of the small animals, especially the little silly Ugly Duckling. Its various charmingly naive looks were perfectly presented in the picture book. It was obvious that Anne had been observing it very carefully. "I think we can print 10,000 copies directly." Meg changed his mind. This was a picture book targeted at younger children. After it was released into the market, it might have some incredible effects. There were more and more customers who wanted to buy the Little Mermaid picture book these 2 days. Many were even queuing up just for the picture book, and had also become the idol of many little fellows. Meg often heard conversations about Anne. They were all scenes of children looking for and everywhere. The little fellow had become a real artist and was loved by many people. "Miss, today's 1,000 copies of the picture book are all sold out. There are customers who want to increase the price and buy the rest of the picture books from us for 3,000 copper coins." Mara ran into the tavern and said to AI Faye with surprise and joy, "It's all sold out?" AI Faye was stunned. That was 1,000 copies of the picture book, and it was sold at 2,000 copper coins per copy. She had just received the picture book that Megan trusted someone to send to her last night. This morning, She followed Meg's arrangement and sold it to the public at the Titan Tavern. She didn't expect that in just half a day, the picture book that was limited to 2 copies per person had already been sold out. That was a huge sum of 2 million copper coins. Yes, there weren't many people buying it first, but after a customer bought it, he seemed to have gone somewhere to promote it. Then, a group of people came to buy it. In a short while, the 1,000 copies were sold out. Mara nodded. Her hand was still a little weak as she counted the money. I see. AI Faye was deep in thought. It seemed that the value of the picture book was higher than the selling price. Otherwise, there wouldn't be people who wanted to buy it at a price of 1,000 copper coins. Moreover, they wanted to monopolize it all. Mara looked at AI Faye and urged, "Miss, that customer is still waiting outside. Why don't we sell the rest of the picture books to him? We can earn another 900,000 copper coins for master." Although she wasn't very good at counting, she was still very clear about this account. If she sold the rest of the picture books to that customer, not only would she earn more money, she would also save herself the trouble of selling it. Tell him that we won't sell the picture books as a package and we won't increase the price. From tomorrow onwards, each person will be limited to 1 copy and priority will be given to the customers who come to the tavern. AI Faye shook her head and said, Meg had already predicted that this would happen in the letter. He also specifically asked her not to sell the picture books as a package. The more customers, the better. This was because this was not only an excellent picture book, but also an advertisement for the Black Cat Song Troupe. Chapter 22:51. Wow, that's a great drawing. Boss Hades' daughter is a genius painter. You've painted me so well. This picture book is going to be a hit. Looks like our opera house is going to be a hit too. The Black Cat Song Troupe's cast huddled together to look at the picture book. Mara had sent it to their troupe leader in the morning. They only saw it during their break time and were all amazed. It was a wonderful feeling to see their daily opera in the form of a picture book and completely exceed their expectations. They also knew that Mr. Hades had spent 5 million copper coins to buy the exclusive rights to use Miss Black Cat's picture book. These few days, the opera house was closed for renovation. They were all rehearsing in the backyard, waiting for the opera house's renovation to be completed so that they could welcome the audience with a brand new look. They were originally worried that the frequent closure would cause a loss of customers after just a few days of operation. But after seeing the picture book, their worries disappeared. Instead, they began to look forward to the scene of the opera house being filled with customers. But the price of a single copy of this picture book is 2,000 copper coins. Mara said that she would sell 1,000 copies today. That means that she can sell 2 million copper coins in just one day. Wow, doesn't that mean that this picture book could sell for tens of millions of copper coins? Looks like the troupe leader made a stupid decision. The cast whispered, "What are you all crowding around for? Don't rehearse. The opera house will reopen in 2 days. If you screw up and embarrass me, I'll teach you all a lesson." Vicky scolded as she walked out. Everyone quickly put down the picture book and scattered. Vicky picked up the picture book on the table, the corner of her mouth twitching. She knew more. Mr. Hades had sent a total of 10,000 picture books to AI Faye. The price was 2,000 copper coins per copy, and there was a limit of 1,000 copies per day. She had just been relaxing on the second floor when she saw that Mara had finished work. 1,000 picture books had been sold out in half a day. The demand was completely outstripping the supply. That meant that these 10,000 picture books would all be sold in 10 days, making a net profit of 20 million copper coins. With no promotion and a high price, Miss Black Cat suddenly became popular. It would be a lie to say that she didn't regret it. Vicky's heart was bleeding right now. Her original expectation was that Hades would release an ink version of the picture book in a few months. With Anne's excellent drawing skills and story, Miss Black Cat would sell well. However, after deducting the various expenses with the meager profit from the black and white edition, the annual profit would not be too high. However, she did not expect Hades to be so efficient and complete the printing in just a few days. What was even more unexpected was that he actually took out a super high-definition color print. She was someone who had seen the original version, but when she got the picture book this morning, she almost couldn't tell that it was a copy. According to her understanding, the printing technology on the Northern continent was still in the stage of black and white printing. Not to mention such advanced color printing technology, they didn't even understand the basic principles of color printing. Hades' way of doing things was simply like cheating. This is the color printing technology. Did someone smuggle the printing machine out of the dungeon? Vicky muttered to herself. She still found it unbelievable. This was the only explanation that could explain it. But no matter what, the color printing directly made Miss Black Cat the secret to wealth. The exquisite style and outstanding colors of the picture book were perfectly preserved by the color printing, and the exciting story was far better than most of the picture books on the market. Vicky was sure that the Miss Black Cat picture book would definitely be a hit and bring Hades a huge return. And originally, she was also qualified to share part of the return. On the bright side, if the Miss Black Cat picture book is a hit, then there should be more people willing to walk into the Black Cat Opera House to listen to the opera version of Miss Black Cat. Vicky smiled. Mr. Hades' 5 million copper coins were not a bad deal for her. She used the money to completely upgrade the opera house from a modified circus to a real professional opera house. An auditorium that could accommodate 1,000 audience members at the same time, a stage that could perform large-scale operas, and a few newly hired theater staff. These were all things that she didn't dare to imagine before, but now she had achieved them in one go. Mr. Hades was her benefactor, and this was something she had to remember. The success of the Miss Black Cat picture book was more due to his outstanding business acumen and operation. She also dismissed the idea of asking she to investigate the color printing. If the printing machine really came from the underground city, she might just erase Hades in order to hide the existence of the underground city. But the next time I see Mr. Hades, I can still ask him a little. After all, I have to keep a low profile with this thing. Vicky muttered to herself. Meg did not expect that someone would associate the color printing with the underground city. But after pushing the blame to the Night Elves, he felt a lot more relaxed. As long as they talked about the color printing, he would directly ask them to go out and turn left to find the Night Elves. If we don't drink, can't we suck out the snails? At the dinner table, Barbara held a snail and frowned. The other girls had similar expressions and looked at the hard-shell snails in their hands helplessly. Mag also made a portion of the new dish that was released tonight for everyone during dinner. However, after smelling the spicy and fresh snails and taking a sip of the spicy soup, the girls were stumped. Slurp, slurp, slurp. Amy, who had sucked 3 snails, put down the shell and chewed on the snail meat. She looked at everyone and shook her head. No, you can suck it out even without drinking. The snails are delicious. Everyone looked at each other and felt a little hot on their faces. At times like this, strength creates miracles. Irina took out a hammer and a small chopping board from somewhere. She placed the snail on the chopping board and raised her hand to hammer it. The shell broke, leaving a piece of snail meat intact. Irina thumped it a few times and then ate with chopsticks. Meg smiled. He had expected everyone to be at a loss. He picked up a snail, took a sip of the soup, and pinched it with 2 fingers. He demonstrated while saying, "There's actually a technique to sucking the snail. Put the snail to your mouth, wrap it with your lips, and breathe in your energy center. Then, when the snail is not paying attention, gently suck and the meat will naturally fall into your mouth. This kind of snail has a soul. The tail has been processed, leaving only the head. It's all edible, so feel free to suck it," Meg reminded them. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.